Welcome to the Verified Fears Haunted Files, where the stories you'll hear tonight are more than just urban legends. They're the terrifying truth. In these small towns, families have lived in fear for generations, trapped by spirits that refuse to let go. From chilling footsteps in empty houses to disappearances that no one can explain. These 11 stories are guaranteed to leave you questioning what's lurking just beyond the corner of your eye. Can you handle the truth? Stay with us, if you dare. Have you ever ignored a warning sign, only to realize too late why it was there? I need to tell you what happened to me 3 years ago outside Meridian, Mississippi. I've tried to rationalize it. Tried to convince myself I was exhausted or hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that some places hold on to their tragedies so tightly that they play them out again and again, waiting for someone like me to witness them. It was late August. One of those suffocating southern nights where the air feels thick enough to chew. I was driving back from my cousin Everly's wedding in Jackson, taking the back roads because the interstate was closed for construction. My GPS had me on Route 39, a 2-lane highway that cuts through the pine forests and forgotten farmland of east central Mississippi. The kind of road where you might see one other car every 20 minutes if you're lucky. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when my phone died. No GPS, no music, just me and the drone of cicadas screaming through my open windows. Around midnight, my headlights caught something up ahead. A railroad crossing, the old-fashioned kind with wooden crossbucks, but no lights, no gates, nothing automated. As I got closer, I could see the paint was faded and peeling. And there was this hand-painted sign nailed to the post. It said, "Stop, look, listen," in letters that had been white once, but were now the color of old bones. Something about it made my stomach turn. Maybe it was how the words were painted, each letter slightly uneven, like whoever made it was shaking. I slowed down as I approached, more out of instinct than caution. The crossing looked abandoned. Weeds grew up through the road on both sides, and in my headlights, I could see the pavement was buckled and cracked where the rails should have been. Should have been. But there were no rails, no tracks at all. Just 2 faint depressions in the asphalt where they used to run, and the wooden crossbucks standing there like grave markers. I should have kept driving. I should have rolled right over that empty crossing and never looked back. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the sign. Maybe it was the way the night had gone so quiet suddenly, like every cricket and frog had held its breath at once. I put the car in park and sat there, engine idling, staring at those empty depressions in the road. That's when I heard it. A low rumble, distant but unmistakable. The sound of a train. My whole body went cold. I looked left, then right, scanning the tree line on both sides of the road. There was nothing. No train, no tracks, no lights cutting through the darkness. But the sound was getting louder, closer, and I could feel it now, a vibration coming up through my seat, through the steering wheel, rattling in my chest. I should have driven away. Every instinct was screaming at me to move, but I was frozen, hands locked on the wheel, watching those empty spaces where the tracks used to be. The rumbling became a roar, and then I saw it. A light, piercing and white-hot, emerged from the tree line to my left. But it wasn't coming down a track. It was floating, hovering about 6 feet off the ground, and behind it, materializing out of the darkness, like something dragged up from the bottom of a deep well, was a train. It wasn't solid. That's the best way I can describe it. It was there, massive and real, close enough that I could see every detail. But it was wrong. The metal looked tarnished, corroded, like it had been sitting underwater for decades. The windows were dark except for this pale, sickly glow coming from inside. And the sound. God, the sound was deafening now. Metal shrieking against metal, wheels grinding against rails that didn't exist, and underneath it all, something else. Something that made my skin crawl. Voices. Human voices. Screaming. The train was passing directly in front of me, close enough that if the tracks had been real, if any of this had been real, it would have torn my car in half. I could see inside the windows now. There were people in there. Dozens of them, maybe more. Their faces were pressed against the glass, mouths open, eyes wide, with terror so pure it didn't look human anymore. They were looking at me. All of them. Staring directly at me with those awful, pleading eyes. I saw a woman in the first car, wearing what looked like a dress from the 1950s, her hands splayed against the window. Next to her was a man in a conductor's uniform, his hat still perfectly straight on his head, even though half his face was dark with something I didn't want to identify. There were children. That's what broke something inside me. I saw children in those windows, small faces with wide eyes, reaching toward me like I could help them, like I could pull them out of whatever hell they were trapped in. The train kept coming, car after car after car, each window full of those faces, those desperate, terrified faces, and the screaming never stopped. It was coming from inside the train, pouring out of it like smoke. And I realized with a horror that made my vision blur that they were screaming the same thing over and over. A warning. Get out, get out, get out. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours. It felt like forever. But finally, the last car passed in front of me, and I caught a glimpse of something painted on its side. Letters, faded and barely visible, but I could make them out. Southern Railway, Meridian Local. The moment the train cleared the crossing, everything stopped. The sound cut off like someone had flipped a switch. The rumbling ceased. The screaming died. The train vanished, not gradually, but instantly, like it had never been there at all. The night sounds rushed back in. Crickets and frogs singing like nothing had happened. And I was alone on that empty road, with my headlights shining on an abandoned railroad crossing. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely shift the car into drive. I crossed over those empty depressions and drove away, faster than I should have, not caring about the potholes or the curves. I just needed to get away from that place. I drove until I hit the interstate. And then I drove until I found a rest stop with lights and people and the beautiful, ordinary chaos of civilization. I didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe me? But it ate at me, that image of those faces, those children pressing against the glass. So I did what any desperate person does in the digital age. I started researching. I spent weeks combing through newspaper archives and historical records, and finally, I found it. On August 17th, 1952, the Southern Railway's Meridian Local derailed at a rural crossing outside the city. A combination of mechanical failure and human error sent the train off the tracks at full speed. 73 people died. Men, women, children. The newspaper articles described it as one of the worst rail disasters in Mississippi history. They quoted a survivor, a man named Camden, who'd been thrown clear of the wreckage. He said the screaming lasted for hours. He said some of the passengers were trapped in cars that caught fire, and others were crushed when the train folded in on itself like an accordion. He said the worst part was knowing they were going to die and being unable to do anything but wait. The tracks were removed in 1967. The railroad company went bankrupt from the lawsuits, and the line was abandoned. But the crossing remained, and according to local records, there had been complaints. People called the sheriff's office reporting strange sounds at midnight. Drivers claimed to see lights where no train could be. In 1983, a woman named Audrey drove her car into a ditch, swerving to avoid a train that wasn't there. In 1991, a man named Hassan had a heart attack at that crossing, found dead in his truck with his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. After reading all of this, I understood something that still keeps me up at night. That train isn't a ghost. It's a loop, a moment of pure terror so intense that it burned itself into that place like a scar. Those people, those 73 souls, they're still dying. Every night at midnight, they relive those final moments. And they're conscious enough to know it, conscious enough to try to warn anyone who stops. I've never gone back. I take the interstate now, always, even if it adds an hour to my drive. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my car, I think about them. I think about that woman in the 1950s dress, about that conductor with his hat still straight, about those children reaching through the windows. I think about how they're still there, still trapped in that moment, still screaming into the darkness. And I wonder how many other people have stopped at that crossing. How many have seen what I saw? How many ignored the warning and paid a price I can't even imagine? Because here's what I learned that night. What I know with absolute certainty now. Some tragedies are so terrible that they don't end. They just repeat over and over, waiting in the dark for the next witness. So if you're ever driving through Mississippi, through those empty back roads where the pine trees grow thick and the night seems darker than it should, and you come across an old railroad crossing with a hand-painted sign that says, "Stop, look, listen," please, I'm begging you, don't stop, don't look, don't listen, just drive. Drive as fast as you can and don't look back. Because if you do stop, if you do wait, you might see what I saw. And once you've seen those faces, once you've heard those screams, you'll carry them with you for the rest of your life. Wondering if someday, somehow, you'll end up on the other side of that glass, pressing your face against a window that no one can break, screaming warnings that no one will hear. That's my story. That's what happened to me at the midnight crossing outside Meridian. I survived it, but I'll never escape it. What would you do if the voice calling your name wasn't human? My name is Crew, and I inherited something I never wanted. When my uncle Mauricio died last spring, I didn't expect anything from his estate. We weren't close. He'd been a recluse for the last 15 years of his life, living alone in a fishing cabin deep in the Louisiana bayou, about 40 miles west of Houma. The family always said he'd gone a little strange after his wife left him, that the isolation had gotten to him. So when the lawyer called and told me he'd left me the property, my first instinct was to sell it sight unseen. But the lawyer said I needed to go out there first, that there were personal effects to sort through, papers to sign. He said it had to be done in person. I wish I'd refused. The drive out to the cabin took me down increasingly narrow roads until I was on what could barely be called a path, my sedan scraping bottom on the rutted dirt. The bayou pressed in on both sides, cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, creating a tunnel of green shadow even in the middle of the day. The air smelled like rot and flowers, that peculiar Louisiana mix of death and growth happening simultaneously. When I finally reached the cabin, it was worse than I'd imagined. The whole structure tilted slightly to one side. wooden stilts sinking unevenly into the soft ground. The porch sagged, and the windows were so coated with grime they looked opaque. Inside wasn't much better. The cabin was a single large room with a kitchenette, a cot, and a wooden table covered in papers. Everything smelled like mildew and old coffee. But what struck me immediately were the windows. Every single one had thick curtains drawn across them, the fabric so heavy that barely any light penetrated. And on each window frame, someone had nailed horseshoes, upside down. Later, I'd learned that's significant. Upside-down horseshoes don't hold luck. They let it drain away. Or they let other things drain away. I started going through Mauricio's belongings, mostly to see if there was anything worth keeping before I listed the property. That's when I found the journals. Dozens of them, stacked in a wooden crate under the cot. They went back years, some with dates, some without. The early entries were mundane. Fishing reports, weather observations, grocery lists. But as I flipped through them, the tone changed. The handwriting got messier, more frantic, and the content got strange. The first mention that made my skin prickle was dated April 3rd, 3 years ago. Mauricio wrote, "Heard Diane calling me tonight from the water. I know it wasn't her. Diane's been gone 6 years and she hated this place. But it sounded exactly like her. Exactly. Even knew the pet name she used. I didn't go to the window. I won't make that mistake." I flipped ahead. May 17th. It's learning. Last night it was Diane again, but tonight it was my brother Vincent. He's been dead since 2004. It called me by my childhood nickname, the one only Vincent used. It knows things it shouldn't know. I've started sleeping with the curtains weighted down. Don't look at the water after dark. Whatever you do, don't look. My hands were trembling as I continued reading. The entries became more detailed, more desperate. Mauricio wrote about hearing voices every night, always after sunset, always coming from the direction of the bayou. The voices of people he'd known, people he'd loved, people who were dead or gone. His mother, his childhood friend Zaid, his daughter Brooklyn, who'd cut off contact with him years ago but was very much alive. The voices would call to him, beg him to come to the water, to come outside, to just look, just for a moment. In an entry from last October, Mauricio described what happened to his neighbor, a man named Roland, who lived about a mile down the bayou. Roland had come by one evening, agitated, saying he'd heard his son calling for help from the swamp. His son Wilder was stationed overseas in the military. Roland knew logically that Wilder couldn't be out there, but the voice was so convincing, so desperate. Roland had gone to the water's edge with a flashlight, calling back. Mauricio wrote, "I tried to stop him. I ran after him, but I was too late. I saw Roland standing at the edge of the bayou, shin deep in the water, his flashlight pointed down. He was staring at something in the water, and he was smiling. Not a normal smile. Too wide, like something was pulling his face into that expression. He walked deeper. I screamed at him to stop, but he didn't even turn around. He just kept walking until the water closed over his head. They found his body 2 days later, caught in the roots half a mile downstream. The coroner said he drowned, said it looked like he'd just walked into the water and never tried to surface. I should have left right then. I should have dropped those journals, walked out of that cabin, and never come back. But I kept reading, compelled by a horrible fascination. Mauricio had become obsessed with figuring out what was in the bayou. He'd researched the area's history and found that the land had a reputation going back centuries. The Chitimacha people who originally inhabited the region had considered this particular stretch of bayou forbidden. French settlers in the 1700s reported hearing voices in the swamp, voices that lured people to their deaths. There were dozens of drowning cases over the years, all with the same strange details. People walking calmly into the water. People found with peaceful expressions despite having drowned. People who'd been heard talking to someone right before they disappeared, even though they were alone. Mauricio's theory, developed over pages and pages of increasingly unhinged writing, was that something lived in the bayou water. Something old and patient and hungry. It couldn't leave the water, but it could listen. It could hear conversations, absorb voices, learn the intimate details of people's lives. And then it would use that information to create perfect lures, calling out in the voices of loved ones, drawing people close enough to... What? He never quite articulated what he thought happened. But he was convinced that looking at the water after dark was dangerous. That seeing whatever was in there would make you vulnerable to it. The final journal entry was dated 2 weeks before Mauricio died. His handwriting was barely legible. It's calling me with Sarah's voice now. Sarah's been dead for 40 years, but I still hear her laugh in my dreams sometimes. It knows that. It knows she's the one I'd still come running for. It's getting harder to resist. I hear her every night now, asking why I won't come see her, asking if I ever loved her at all. I keep the curtains closed. I keep the lights off. But I can hear her crying, and God help me, I want to go to her. I want to see her one more time, even if I know it isn't really her. That's what it does. It makes you want it. It makes you choose to come. There was nothing after that. According to the death certificate, Mauricio had drowned in the bayou behind his cabin. They'd found him floating face down, about 20 feet from shore. No signs of struggle. No indication of foul play. The report noted that he'd simply drowned, probably disoriented in the dark, an old man who'd lost his footing. But I knew better now. I knew what had happened to him. I decided to stay one night. I told myself it was because it was already getting late, because I didn't want to navigate those terrible roads in the dark. But truthfully, some part of me didn't believe it. Some part of me thought Mauricio had lost his mind in isolation, that the journals were the ravings of a paranoid hermit. I thought one night in the cabin would prove there was nothing to fear. I made sure every curtain was closed. I kept the lights on. I tried to read through more of Mauricio's papers, cataloging what I'd need to deal with. The sun set around 7:30, and for a while, everything was fine. I could hear the normal bayou sounds. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something in the water. Normal. Around 10 o'clock, I heard my name. Crew. It came from outside, from the direction of the water. A woman's voice, soft and sweet. I froze, my pen hovering over the paper I'd been writing on. Crew, baby, is that you? My mother's voice. My mother who died of cancer when I was 19. My mother who used to call me baby in exactly that tone, with exactly that inflection. I felt tears spring to my eyes before I could stop them. I've missed you so much, sweetheart. Won't you come talk to me, just for a minute? I stood up, my body moving before my brain caught up. My hand reached for the curtain. I wanted so badly to pull it back, to see her, even though I knew it was impossible. Even though I'd read Mauricio's warnings, the voice was so perfect, so exactly right, that every rational thought evaporated. Crew, please, I just want to see your face. Don't you want to see me? My fingers touched the fabric of the curtain. It would be so easy. Just a quick look. Just to see what was out there. Maybe it really was her somehow. Maybe death wasn't as final as I thought. Maybe... A loud crash from the kitchen startled me back to reality. I spun around to see that a stack of Mauricio's journals had fallen off the counter. The top one had landed open to a page where he'd written in large, desperate letters, "Don't look, it wants you to look." I stumbled backward from the window, my heart hammering. Outside, my mother's voice continued, but now it sounded different to my ears. The tone was still perfect, but there was something underneath it, something patient and cold. "Crew? Baby? Why won't you answer me?" I backed into the center of the room, as far from the windows as I could get. The voice continued for hours, cycling through different people. My mother, my high school girlfriend Lila, my best friend Dax, who'd moved to California, my grandmother, Madeline. Each voice was perfect. Each one knew things only that person would know. Each one begged me to come outside, to come to the water, to just look. Around 3 in the morning, the voices stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the calling had been. I sat on Mauricio's cot, shaking, watching the curtained windows, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I packed everything I could carry and left. I put the cabin on the market that week, practically giving it away to the first buyer who showed interest. I didn't mention the journals. I didn't mention what I'd heard. Let them figure it out themselves, or better yet, let them be the kind of people who don't hear it at all. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. That thing in the bayou, whatever it is, it heard me that night. It heard my voice, my name, my reactions. It learned about me the same way it learned about everyone else. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I wonder if it remembers me. I wonder if someday, someone else will be in that cabin, and they'll hear my voice calling from the water. They'll hear me begging them to come outside, to help me, to save me. And I wonder what I'll sound like when I'm the lure. I wonder whose name I'll be calling. I wonder how many people that thing has collected over the centuries, how many voices it can use now, how many perfect imitations it has stored in whatever passes for its memory. I sold my uncle's cabin, but I can't sell the knowledge of what's out there. I can't unknow what I learned from those journals. There are places in this world where something patient and ancient waits in the dark water, listening, learning, calling out in the voices of everyone you've ever loved. And the worst part is that it doesn't force you. It doesn't drag you down. It just calls and calls and calls until you choose to come on your own, until you want it badly enough that you walk into the water with a smile on your face, grateful for one more moment with someone you've lost. That's what happened to Mauricio. That's what happened to Roland. And that's what will keep happening. Because there's no way to warn people that will make them truly believe until they hear it themselves. Until they hear that perfect voice calling their name from the darkness, offering them everything they've been missing. I just hope you never do. Could you tell the difference between salvation and damnation? My name is Dario, and I used to think I understood faith. I was raised Baptist in rural Alabama, spent every Sunday morning in a pew, knew the hymns by heart. But faith, real faith, the kind that makes your hands shake and your voice crack, that came later. That came the night I walked into a revival tent outside Tuscaloosa and realized that not everything that calls itself holy actually is. It was September, unseasonably hot even for Alabama. I'd been driving through Hale County delivering equipment for my uncle's construction company when my truck started overheating. Steam poured from under the hood, and I barely made it to the shoulder before the engine died completely. This was back in 2019, before I had a decent phone, and I was on a stretch of County Road 20 where there was no signal anyway. No cars passed. The sun was setting fast, that quick southern twilight that goes from golden to dark in what feels like minutes. I started walking, hoping to find a house or a gas station, anything. The road cut through pine forest and abandoned farmland, kudzu consuming everything that wasn't actively being beaten back. After about 2 miles, I saw lights through the trees. Not house lights. These were bright and white, the kind of lights that promise people an activity. I pushed through the overgrowth toward them. The tent was massive, old-fashioned canvas stretched over wooden poles, sitting in a clearing that looked like it had been farmland once. Cars were parked in rough rows in the grass, maybe 30 or 40 of them, all older models, trucks and sedans from the 80s and 90s. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, "The Eternal Gathering, all welcome, services nightly." I could hear singing coming from inside, voices raised in harmony, and it sounded beautiful. It sounded like home. I figured I could use their phone, maybe find someone willing to give me a ride to the nearest town. I walked toward the entrance, where an older man in a dark suit stood greeting people. His name tag said, "Brother Selim," in careful handwriting. "Welcome, son," he said, and his smile was warm, but his eyes were strange. Too focused, too intense. "You're just in time for service." "I actually just need to use a phone," I said. "My truck broke down up the road." "All in due time," he said, and his hand was on my shoulder, firm, guiding me toward the tent opening. "The Lord brought you here for a reason. Come, sit, give yourself over to the experience." Something about the way he said that last part made me uncomfortable. But I was tired and stranded, and the singing really did sound beautiful. I let him guide me inside. The interior of the tent was lit by hundreds of candles, their flames creating shadows that moved across the canvas walls like living things. Wooden benches were arranged in rows, facing a raised platform where a preacher stood, arms outstretched. The congregation, maybe 200 people, were on their feet, swaying and singing. The song wasn't one I recognized, but the melody was haunting, almost hypnotic. Brother Selim led me to a seat near the back. I sat down, and immediately the woman next to me, her name tag read Sister Juniper, grabbed my hand. On my other side, a young man named Colson did the same. Their grips were tight, almost painful, but everyone was holding hands, I realized. The entire congregation was connected, a chain of bodies swaying in unison. The preacher on the platform was speaking now, his voice rising and falling in that particular cadence that Southern preachers perfect. Part sermon, part song. But I couldn't focus on his words. There was something wrong with the way people were moving. They swayed together, yes, but it was too synchronized. Exactly synchronized. Every head tilted at the same angle at the same moment. Every breath was drawn in unison. I tried to pull my hands free, but Juniper and Colson held tight. "Just listen," Juniper whispered, and her voice had that same hypnotic quality as the singing. "You'll understand soon. We all understand eventually." The preacher was talking about forever now, about eternal service, about becoming part of something greater than yourself. His words started to blur together, and I felt dizzy. The candlelight seemed to be getting brighter and dimmer in waves, pulsing like a heartbeat. The congregation responded to the preacher's statements in perfect unison, their voices blending into a single sound. "We are eternal," they said together. And it wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't joyful. It was flat, mechanical, like an automated recording. "We serve forever," they intoned. And this time I noticed that their mouths didn't quite match the words. The sounds came a split second before their lips moved, like they were lip-syncing to something else. I looked around desperately, and that's when I noticed the candles. They weren't just regular candles. They were inside glass jars, and at the base of each jar was a small photograph. I squinted at the nearest one. The photo showed a man, maybe in his 50s, smiling at the camera. Above the photo, carved into the candle wax, was a name, Quincy, and a date, 1987, 1989. My blood went cold. Those weren't memorial candles. Those were duration markers. I scanned more candles. Horror mounting. Bellamy, 1992, 1995. Layton, 1978, 1981. Every candle had a name, a face, and 2 dates that were only a few years apart. I yanked my hands free with enough force that both Juniper and Colson stumbled. The synchronized swaying of the congregation stuttered for just a moment, like a skipping record, and every head turned toward me. 200 faces, all wearing the same expression. Not anger, not surprise. Just that same too intense focus I'd seen in Brother Salem's eyes. "He's noticing," someone said. And I couldn't tell who because none of their mouths had moved. The preacher stopped mid-sentence and pointed directly at me. "Brother Dario," he said, "and how did he know my name? I'd never told anyone my name. You're frightened. That's natural. Everyone is frightened at first. But fear is just the old self dying. Once it's gone, there's only peace, only service, only forever." I stood up, stumbling over the bench. The congregation rose with me, still in perfect synchronization. They didn't move toward me, but they didn't have to. They simply stood there, a wall of bodies between me and the exit, all watching with those focused, hungry eyes. "I need to leave," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "Right now." "But you just arrived," the preacher said, and he was smiling. His teeth reflected the candlelight in a way that seemed wrong. "And the service never ends. That's the beautiful part, Brother Dario. We've been in service since the tent was raised. Some of us for months, some for years, some for decades. We don't leave, we don't sleep, we don't hunger or thirst or age. We just serve in eternal fellowship forever and ever. Amen." I looked at the faces around me again, really looked, and I saw it. The wrongness I hadn't been able to articulate. Their skin had a waxy quality like the candles. Their eyes didn't blink. And there, on Sister Juniper's neck, barely visible in the candlelight, was a layer of dust. These people weren't alive, or they were alive in some way that had nothing to do with living. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just bolted toward what I hoped was an exit. The congregation moved to block me, but their synchronized movements meant they all moved at once, creating gaps I could slip through. I crashed through a wall of bodies, their hands grabbing at my clothes, my hair, my skin. They were cold. So cold. "You'll come back," the preacher called after me. They always do. "Where else will you go? Who else will have you? We're eternal, Brother Dario. We're patient. We'll be here tomorrow night, and the next night, and the night after that. We'll be here forever." I broke through the last row of people and threw myself at the tent wall, scrambling under the canvas. My shirt tore on something, and my hands scraped against rocks. But I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me, not running, just walking in that synchronized way, steady and inevitable. I crashed through the kudzu and underbrush, branches whipping my face, roots trying to trip me. Behind me, I could hear the singing starting up again, that beautiful, horrible melody that seemed to follow me through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on the side of County Road 20, gasping and sobbing. A truck found me there around midnight. The driver, an older woman named Quinn, took one look at my torn clothes and bleeding hands and drove me straight to the sheriff's office in Greensboro. I told them everything. The tent, the congregation, the candles with their horrible dates. The deputy, a tired-looking man named Ahmad, listened to my story with an expression that went from concern to something else. Something like recognition. "Son," he said finally, "there's no revival tent out on County Road 20. Hasn't been for years." "I was just there," I insisted. 2 hours ago. It's in a clearing about 3 miles south of where my truck broke down." Ahmad exchanged a glance with Quinn. "Take me there," he said. We drove out in his patrol car, me directing him to where I'd seen the lights. But when we reached the spot, there was nothing. No clearing. No trampled grass where cars had parked. Just dense forest, kudzu and pine trees pressing close to the road. Ahmad swept the area with a powerful flashlight, and we walked into the woods where I swore the tent had been. We found the clearing about 50 yards in, but it was old, ancient. Whatever had been there had been gone for a long time. The grass was waist-high, small trees grew in what had been the open space. But there, half buried in the dirt and dead leaves, was a wooden pole, and another, and another. The frame of a large tent, collapsed and rotting, consumed by decades of neglect. "There was a revival here," Ahmad said quietly. "Long time ago. Before I was born, even. My grandfather told me about it. Traveling preacher came through in the 60s, set up this tent, started holding services. People said he was magnetic, that folks would come from 3 counties over to hear him preach. But then people started disappearing. They'd come to the service and never leave. Their cars would sit in the clearing for days, weeks. Eventually, the county came out to investigate." He paused, sweeping his flashlight across the rotted poles. "They found the tent empty. No preacher, no congregation. Just candles. Hundreds of candles, all still burning, with photographs inside them. Photographs of people who'd been reported missing. The tent was torn down and everyone tried to forget about it." "But I saw it," I said. "I was inside it. They grabbed me." Ahmad looked at me for a long moment. "My grandfather said the preacher made a bargain. Said he promised his congregation eternal life, eternal fellowship. Said they'd never have to face death or judgment or loneliness. And maybe he delivered. Maybe they're still in service somewhere, in some version of that tent that exists outside normal time. And maybe, on certain nights, the tent appears to people who are lost, who are vulnerable, who are searching for something." He put his hand on my shoulder, and it was warm, human, real. "You got out. Most don't. Whatever you saw in there, whatever grabbed you, you were strong enough to run. Don't go looking for it again. Don't try to understand it. Just be grateful you're still here, still yourself, still free." I took his advice. I moved away from Alabama the next year, settled in Tennessee, tried to build a normal life. But I think about that tent sometimes, especially on hot September nights when the air feels thick and charged. I think about Sister Juniper with her dusty neck and cold hands. I think about those candles with their dates, marking not lifespans, but sentences. I think about the preacher's promise. We'll be here forever. And I wonder how many people, broken down on dark roads, desperate and lost, have seen those lights through the trees. How many have walked into that tent seeking help or salvation or just human connection. How many are still there, swaying in perfect synchronization, singing songs they don't remember learning, serving in an eternal service that has no end and no meaning? I wonder if they're happy, in whatever way happiness exists for them now. Or if somewhere deep inside, in whatever remains of their original selves, they're screaming. Screaming for someone to help them, to release them, to end the service that never ends. I got out. But I've never forgotten the feeling of those cold hands gripping mine, trying to pull me into the synchronized sway. I've never forgotten the preacher's voice promising forever like it was a gift instead of a curse. And I've never forgotten that on some September nights, in certain clearings, in specific moments when the world is thin and strange, that tent is still there, still lit, still singing, still waiting for the next lost soul to wander in, looking for salvation. Have you ever crossed a threshold you knew you shouldn't? I need to tell you about the worst mistake I ever made and how it cost me my best friend. My name is Eliseo, and 3 years ago, I was part of a group of urban explorers in Savannah, Georgia. We called ourselves the Midnight Historians, which sounds pretentious now. But back then we thought we were doing something important, documenting abandoned places, preserving their stories before they were demolished or renovated into something sterile and modern. We had a YouTube channel, a decent following, all the gear. We thought we were invincible. The Pecan Grove Estate had been on our list for over a year. It was a plantation house about 15 miles outside Savannah, built in 1847 by a cotton merchant named Thaddeus Carver. The place had been abandoned since the 1970s, slowly rotting behind a wall of overgrown vegetation and no trespassing signs. Local kids spread stories about it, the usual ghost tales. But what caught our attention was how consistent the stories were. People who'd gone inside reported the same things. Rooms that shouldn't exist. Photographs that showed people who weren't there when the picture was taken. And a feeling, almost universal among trespassers, that the house was waiting for something. There were 4 of us that night. Me, my girlfriend Kinsley, and our friends Sean and Gustavo. We'd done dozens of explorations together, everywhere from abandoned hospitals to derelict factories. We had a system, safety protocols, communication plans. We thought we were prepared for anything. We arrived just after midnight, parking our van about half a mile down the road and hiking in with our backpacks full of cameras, flashlights, and recording equipment. The estate appeared through the trees, like something out of a nightmare. 3 stories of Greek Revival architecture, white columns black with mold, windows empty of glass, the whole structure tilting slightly to the left like it was drunk. Pecan trees surrounded it, massive and ancient, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the stars. Sean had done the research. He told us about the Carver family as we approached the house. Thaddeus and his wife Margaret had 7 children, but only 3 survived to adulthood. The others died of various illnesses, common for the era. The family prospered until the Civil War, when Union troops occupied the property. There were rumors of atrocities, of family members who disappeared, of servants who were never accounted for. After the war, the remaining Carvers tried to rebuild, but the estate fell into decline. By 1889, the last Carver descendant, a woman named Everly Carver, lived there alone until her death. The house passed through several owners after that, none staying long, until it was finally abandoned in 1972. We found an entrance through a collapsed section of the back wall. Inside, the decay was extensive, but weirdly beautiful. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing layers of different patterns underneath. Archaeological strata of changing tastes. Furniture remained in some rooms, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray snow. Our flashlight beams cut through darkness that felt almost solid. Kinsley was our photographer. She started taking pictures immediately, documenting everything with her digital SLR. Gustavo handled video, sweeping his camera across the ruins while providing whispered narration. Sean took notes on his phone, cataloging what we found. And I was security, keeping us together, watching for structural hazards. The first floor was exactly what we expected. Destroyed elegance, nature reclaiming human spaces, the melancholy poetry of abandonment. We found a dining room with a table still set, plates and silverware arranged for a meal no one had eaten. We found a library with books turned to pulp by water damage. We found a parlor with a piano that, when Gustavo touched the keys, produced sounds like screaming. It was on the second floor that things got strange. We were exploring what must have been bedrooms when Kinsley called out. "Hey, there's another staircase here. I don't remember this being on the floor plans." She was right. The historical documents Sean had found showed the main staircase and a servant's stair. But this was a third option, narrower, the steps looking newer somehow, less damaged. It led upward into darkness. "That's weird," Sean said, studying his phone. "According to this, there shouldn't be anything above the second floor except the attic, and that's accessed from the main stairs." "Could be a renovation," Gustavo suggested. "Something added after the original plans were drawn." We should have left it alone. Every instinct I had was screaming at me not to climb those stairs. But Kinsley was already ascending, her camera raised, and I wasn't going to let her go alone. We all followed. The third floor was impossible. That's the only way I can describe it. The staircase opened into a hallway that was too long, that extended farther than the exterior dimensions of the house should have allowed. The walls here weren't damaged. The wallpaper was intact, showing a pattern of roses and thorns in deep crimson. Gas lamps lined the walls, and though they couldn't possibly still work, they were lit, casting a warm yellow glow. "This isn't right," I said. My voice sounded muffled, like the air itself was absorbing the sound. "We need to go back." But Kinsley was already walking down the hallway, drawn to something. "Look at these portraits," she said, and her voice was dreamy, distant. The walls were covered in photographs in ornate frames. They showed people from different eras: Civil War soldiers, Victorian ladies, children in Depression-era clothes. And they were all standing in front of the Pecan Grove Estate, all looking directly at the camera with expressions that were neither happy nor sad. Just vacant. Gustavo was filming, sweeping his camera across the hall. "Portraits. This is incredible," he was saying. "This is the find of a lifetime. We need to document everything." Sean had gone pale. He was looking at his phone, and his hands were shaking. "Guys," he said. "Guys, we need to leave, right now." "What is it?" I asked. He showed me his phone. He'd been taking pictures of the portraits, zooming in on faces. And in the reflection of the glass covering each photograph, just barely visible, were 4 figures. 4 people who looked exactly like us, standing in the same hallway, wearing the same clothes. But the photograph us were part of the picture, printed on the old paper, stained with age. "That's just a reflection," Gustavo said. But his voice lacked conviction. Kinsley had moved further down the hallway. She stopped in front of a door, one of many lining the corridor. "This one has my name on it," she said. I ran to her. There, on a small brass plaque on the door, was engraved Kinsley, 2022. The date was 3 years in the future from when we were standing there. I grabbed her arm. "We're leaving, now." But the door swung open before she could move, and we all saw what was inside. It was a bedroom, perfectly preserved, decorated in a style from the 1890s. And sitting on the bed, wearing a dress from that era, her hair done in the fashion of the time, was Kinsley. Not a picture of Kinsley, not someone who looked like her. It was her, exact in every detail, except this: Kinsley's eyes were empty, and she was smiling that same vacant smile from all the portraits. The Kinsley beside me screamed and stumbled backward. We all ran, scrambling for the staircase, but the hallway had changed. It stretched endlessly in both directions now, doors on both sides, and each door had a name. I saw my name, Eliseo, 2022. I saw Sean, 2022. Gustavo, 2022. All dated 3 years ahead. The main stairs, Sean gasped. We need to find the main stairs. We ran blindly, trying every door we passed that didn't have our names on it, looking for another way down. Most were locked, but one opened, and we threw ourselves through it without thinking. We tumbled down a different staircase, steeper and narrower, and emerged into the first-floor hallway we'd explored earlier. I counted heads immediately. Me, Sean, Gustavo. 3, only 3. "Where's Kinsley?" I shouted. We all turned, looking back at the staircase we'd just descended, but it was gone. The wall was solid, wallpaper intact, no sign that there had ever been an opening. I screamed her name. We all did, running through the house, checking every room, every corner. We searched for hours as our flashlights died and dawn approached. But Kinsley was gone. She wasn't in the house. She wasn't outside. She wasn't anywhere. We called the police at sunrise. They searched the property with dogs and equipment and found nothing. No trace of Kinsley, no sign of the third floor we described, no portraits, no impossible hallway. The official report said the house only had 2 floors and an attic. They suggested Kinsley had run off, that maybe our relationship had problems we hadn't disclosed. Eventually, they labeled her a missing person, and the case went cold. But I know what happened. And so do Sean and Gustavo, even though we don't talk about it anymore. We went back to the house one more time, 2 weeks after Kinsley disappeared. We had to know. We had to try to find her again. The house was just a ruin. 2 floors, collapsing walls, no gas lamps, no impossible spaces. But in what remained of the parlor, we found something new on the wall. A photograph in an ornate frame, protected somehow from the decay around it. It showed a group of people from different eras, all standing in front of the Pecan Grove Estate. And there, in the back row, wearing the clothes she'd worn the night we lost her, was Kinsley. She had that same vacant smile, that same empty stare, and engraved on the frame, along with dozens of other names and dates, was Kinsley, 2022. That was 3 years ago, the date on her plaque. We thought maybe when we reached 2022 she'd come back somehow, that whatever had taken her would release her. But 2022 came and went, and Kinsley never returned. I drive past the Pecan Grove Estate sometimes, even though it terrifies me. The house is still there, still rotting, still waiting. And sometimes, if I look at it at just the right angle and just the right light, I can see a third floor that shouldn't exist. I dream about her constantly. In my dreams, I'm walking down that impossible hallway again, and all the doors are open now. Each room contains someone. People from different decades, all trapped in moments that never end. And at the end of the hallway, Kinsley is waiting for me. She's wearing that Victorian dress, and she's smiling, and she's holding out her hand. "There's a room for you," she says in the dream. "It has your name on it. Don't you want to see?" I always wake up before I can answer, but I'm terrified that one night I won't. One night I'll take her hand and walk through that door and join her in whatever timeless prison the house creates. Because that's what the Pecan Grove Estate does, I think. It collects people. It pulls them out of their time and keeps them preserved like insects in amber, decorating its impossible rooms with lives that were interrupted, stolen, frozen. Sean won't talk to me anymore. The guilt was too much for him. He moved to Oregon last year, trying to put distance between himself and what happened. Gustavo went to therapy for a while, but eventually he just shut down. He works at a hardware store now, refuses to discuss anything about that night. But I can't let it go. I can't abandon Kinsley to whatever that place is. So I research. I dig through records and histories, looking for some explanation, some way to undo what was done. I found references to other people who disappeared at the Pecan Grove Estate over the years. A servant named Lydia in 1856. A Union soldier named Davis in 1864. A child named Millie in 1901. A vagrant named Wayne in 1968. Dozens of names across more than a century and a half. And I've found something else. A pattern. Everyone who disappeared had their picture found later, added to the collection in the house. And everyone appeared in period dress, regardless of what they'd been wearing when they vanished. As if the house was dressing them up, making them fit its aesthetic, turning them into decorations for rooms that existed outside normal time. I think the Pecan Grove Estate is alive in some way. Or it's a doorway to something that's alive. I think it hungers for people, for moments, for lives it can preserve and display. And I think once it has you, it doesn't let go. I'm telling you this story now because I'm going back. I've spent 3 years preparing, researching, trying to understand what we encountered. I've found references to other houses like this, places where time works differently, where rooms exist that shouldn't. There are theories, old ones, about liminal spaces and threshold magic, about buildings that become something other than buildings when enough tragedy soaks into their foundations. I don't know if I can save Kinsley. I don't even know if what remains in that house is still her in any meaningful way. But I have to try. I owe her that much. She went into that darkness because we all did. Because we thought we were invincible. Because we treated the abandoned and the forgotten like they were just backdrops for our entertainment. We were wrong. Some places are abandoned for a reason. Some thresholds should never be crossed. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. If you're reading this, if you're watching this video, it means I either succeeded or I failed. If Kinsley and I both come back, we'll delete this and try to forget. But if we don't, if you never hear from me again, then you'll know. You'll know that the Pecan Grove Estate has 2 more residents now. 2 more faces for its impossible portraits. 2 more rooms in its endless hallway. And if you're ever near Savannah, if you're ever tempted to explore that rotting mansion behind its wall of pecan trees, please, learn from our mistake. Don't go inside. Don't climb the stairs that shouldn't exist. Don't open doors with names engraved on them. Because the house is patient. The house is always waiting. And once it has you, you'll be waiting too. Forever. In a room with your name on the door. Wearing clothes from an era that isn't yours. Smiling that vacant smile while the world outside moves on without you. That's what happened to Kinsley. That's what might happen to me. And that's what will happen to anyone foolish enough to think they can explore the Pecan Grove Estate and leave unchanged. Some places don't just haunt you. Some places keep you. What if the help you needed came from somewhere it shouldn't? My name is Vicente, and I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving the interstates and back roads of this country for 23 years, seen just about everything there is to see from behind a windshield. I've driven through blizzards in Montana, dust storms in New Mexico, and hurricanes brewing off the Gulf Coast. I thought I knew every trick the road could throw at me. I was wrong. This happened last October, during a run from Little Rock to Mobile. I'd picked up a load of furniture that needed to be delivered by morning, and I was making good time until I wasn't. About 2 hours into Arkansas, just past the Louisiana border, my rig started acting up. The engine was running rough, sputtering like it couldn't decide whether to quit or keep going. I pulled off Interstate 82 onto Highway 15, one of those state routes that cuts through the deep country, thinking I'd find a truck stop or at least a place with a payphone where I could call for help. But Highway 15 just kept going, winding through pine forest so thick it felt like driving through a tunnel. No houses, no businesses. Nothing but trees and darkness, and the occasional reflective mile marker catching my headlights. I watched the numbers count up. Mile 68, mile 71, mile 74. My engine was getting worse, the whole cab shaking now, and I knew I wasn't going to make it much farther. At mile 77, my headlights caught something on the right side of the road. A gas station, old-fashioned looking, with those round-top pumps from the 50s or 60s. The sign above it read, Harlan Service Station, in faded red letters, and there was a single light burning in the front window. I nearly cried with relief. I coaxed my dying rig into the lot, the engine finally giving up with a sound like a death rattle just as I rolled to a stop in front of the pumps. I sat there for a minute, catching my breath, looking at the station. It was small, just a single building with 2 pumps out front and what looked like a garage bay on the side. The architecture was definitely old, that mid-century style you don't see anymore, all straight lines and big windows. But it looked maintained, clean even, which struck me as odd for such a remote location. The paint wasn't peeling, the windows weren't broken, and the area around the pumps was swept clean of debris. I climbed out of the cab, my knees protesting after hours of sitting, and walked toward the front door. A bell chimed when I pushed it open, one of those old-fashioned brass bells on a spring. The interior was like stepping into a time capsule. The shelves were stocked with products I hadn't seen in decades. Glass bottles of Coca-Cola, the old-style ones. Cigarette brands that hadn't existed since the 70s. Candy bars and packaging designs I remembered from my childhood. And everything was arranged perfectly. No dust, no fading, like it had all been stocked yesterday. Behind the counter stood a man in a grease-stained uniform, the kind mechanics used to wear, with his name embroidered on the chest. Harlan. He looked to be in his 60s, with gray hair slicked back and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Evening, friend," he said, and his voice had that particular Arkansas drawl, slow and syrupy. "Looks like you're having some trouble." "Engine died," I said. "Any chance you've got a phone I could use? Need to call my dispatcher." "Phone's out," Harlan said apologetically. "Storm last week took down the lines. But don't you worry none. I can take a look at your rig, probably get you back on the road." "At this hour?" I asked. It had to be close to 2 in the morning. Harlan shrugged. "I keep odd hours. Not much else to do out here. Pop the hood and I'll see what I can see." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why a gas station in the middle of nowhere was open at 2 a.m., why the products on the shelves looked vintage but new, why something about Harlan's smile made my skin crawl. But I was tired and stranded and desperate, so I nodded and went back outside to pop the hood. Harlan followed me out with a toolbox that looked like it was from the 1950s, heavy metal with a rounded top. He propped open the hood and shined a flashlight into the engine compartment, making thoughtful humming sounds while I stood there uselessly, knowing nothing about diesel engines beyond how to drive them. "Well now," he said after a few minutes, "looks like your fuel pump's gone bad. Lucky for you, I've got a replacement in the garage. Take me about an hour to swap it out." "An hour," I said. "I really need to get back on the road. This load's supposed to be in Mobile by 8 a.m. "Best I can do," Harlan said cheerfully. "But you're welcome to wait inside. Help yourself to a soda. On the house." He disappeared into the garage before I could argue, and I heard the clang of tools and the screech of metal on metal. I went back into the station, too wired to sit in my cab, and grabbed one of those glass Coca-Cola bottles from the cooler. It was ice cold. When I twisted off the cap, it hissed like they used to, before everything went to twist off in plastic. I sat on a stool by the counter, sipping the Coke. And that's when I started really looking around. The calendar on the wall showed October 1959. The prices on the gas pumps, which I could see through the window, were 29 cents a gallon. The magazines in the rack were all from the late 50s, Life and Look and the Saturday Evening Post. And they weren't vintage reproductions or collector's items. They were just magazines, slightly yellowed, sitting there like they'd been delivered that week. A cold feeling started spreading through my chest. I set down the Coke bottle and walked to the front window, looking out at my rig. It sat there in the yellowish light from the station, looking solid and real and modern. But everything around it looked wrong now, looked like it belonged to a different era. I heard the bell chime and spun around. A woman had entered through the front door, wearing a dress and hairstyle from the 1950s, carrying a purse that matched. She smiled at me and walked to the counter, reaching for a pack of cigarettes from the display. "Evening, Milo," she said to someone who wasn't there, then seemed to realize her mistake. She looked confused for a moment, then her eyes found me, and her smile returned. But it was wrong, too wide, too fixed. "Do you have the time?" she asked, and her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. "It's about 2:30, I said. 2:30, she repeated and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is it really? I thought it was earlier, or later. I can never tell anymore." She turned and walked back out the door without taking the cigarettes, and when I looked through the window, she was gone. No car in the lot, no figure walking away, just gone. I ran outside, my heart hammering. "Harlan," I shouted, "I need to go, now. I don't care about the engine, I'll have it towed." Harlan emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. "Now hold on," he said, and his voice had lost its friendly tone. "I'm almost done. Just another few minutes." "I don't have another few minutes," I said, backing toward my rig. "Something's wrong here. This place isn't right." "Isn't right?" Harlan said, and he tilted his head at an angle that was too sharp, too bird-like. "This place is perfect. This place is exactly as it should be. It's you that doesn't fit, Vicente. You with your modern truck and your hurry, always rushing to the next place, never staying, never appreciating what's right in front of you." "How do you know my name?" I whispered. "I know everyone's name," Harlan said. And he was walking toward me now, still smiling that wrong smile. "Everyone who stops here. Cairo stopped here in 1987, had trouble with his carburetor. Wilson stopped in 1993, needed a tire patched. Jakari stopped in 2001, ran out of gas. They all stopped, and they all stayed. Because this is where people like you belong. Stuck, frozen, forever passing through but never arriving." I lunged for my truck's cab, grabbing the handle, but it wouldn't open. The door was locked, and my keys were gone from my pocket. Harlan was closer now, close enough that I could see his eyes were wrong, too dark, too empty, like looking into wells. "You can't leave," he said softly. "Nobody leaves mile marker 77. This is a junction, Vicente. A place between places. You pulled off the road, and now you're here, and here is all there is." I ran. Didn't think, just bolted for the highway, for the darkness beyond the station's yellow lights. Boots pounded on the pavement, and I could hear Harlan behind me, not running but walking, always walking, his footsteps steady and inevitable. I reached the highway and kept going, running down the center line, looking for any sign of civilization, any other light. Behind me, Harlan's voice called out, echoing strangely in the night. "You'll be back. They always come back. Where else are you going to go?" I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning, my legs turning to rubber. The mile markers passed in my peripheral vision. 78, 79, 80. The numbers were going up, which meant I was getting away, putting distance between me and that nightmare gas station. But then I saw lights ahead, yellow and familiar, and my blood turned to ice. Harlan Service Station, mile marker 77. I was back where I started. I collapsed in the middle of the highway, gasping, trying to understand. I'd run in a straight line, I'd watched the mile markers increase, but somehow I'd circled back. Or the road had circled, or space had bent. I didn't know, couldn't comprehend it. Harlan stood in front of the station, still smiling, still waiting. "Told you," he called. "Can't leave. The road just brings you back. Always does." I got to my feet on shaking legs and tried again, running the opposite direction this time, back the way I'd originally come. The mile markers counted down, 76, 75, 74. I was making progress, getting away. And then the lights appeared ahead again. Harlan Service Station, mile marker 77. I tried 11 times that night. Ran in both directions, cut through the woods, tried to navigate by the stars. Every single time, I ended up back at that station, back at mile 77, with Harlan watching and waiting and smiling. As dawn approached, I sat on the curb in front of the station, defeated, trying to figure out what to do. Harlan brought me another Coke, setting it down beside me almost gently. "It's not so bad," he said. "You get used to it eventually. Time works different here. You could stay forever and it would only feel like a few hours. Or you could stay a few hours and find that forever has passed outside. It's flexible like that." "I want to leave," I said, my voice hoarse from running. "Please, I have a family, a daughter named Allison, a son named Danny. They're waiting for me." For just a moment, something that might have been sadness crossed Harlan's face. "I had a family too," he said quietly. "Before I became part of this place. Before I became the attendant instead of the traveler. It fades, though. The memory of them. Eventually, all you remember is the station, the highway, the people who stop." He stood up, his joints creaking. "I'll make you a deal, Vicente. The same deal I make everyone. You can try one more time to leave. But if you end up back here, you stop fighting. You accept it. You become part of mile marker 77, like all the others." "What others?" I asked, looking around. The station looked empty. Harlan gestured to the building. "They're here, in the spaces between, in the reflections, in the moments when time stutters. You'll see them eventually, if you stay. The woman who asked for the time, she's been here since 1956. The man pumping gas that isn't there, he arrived in 1972. We're all here, all stuck, all serving travelers who can't leave." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. My keys. "One more try," he said, handing them to me. "But make it count." I took the keys, climbed into my rig, and started the engine. It roared to life perfectly. like nothing had ever been wrong with it. I pulled out of the station and onto the highway, driving slowly this time, deliberately, watching everything. At mile marker 78, something changed. The quality of the darkness shifted, became less solid. The trees looked more real, more varied. And ahead, I saw lights. Not the single yellow glow of Harlan Station, but multiple lights. A town, or at least a truck stop. I pressed the accelerator, afraid to hope, afraid that I'd see mile marker 77 appear again. But the markers kept counting up. 79, 80, 81. And then I was pulling into a Flying J truck stop, bright and modern and beautiful. With other trucks parked in neat rows and a 24-hour diner glowing with fluorescent light. I sat in the cab for 10 minutes, just breathing, just existing in a place that was real and normal. Then I went inside, ordered coffee from a tired waitress named Jade, and asked what mile marker we were at. "Mile 92, she said. "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, my hands shaking around the coffee cup. I called my dispatcher from a payphone, made up a story about mechanical trouble, and arranged for someone else to complete the delivery. Then I got back on the road, heading home to Little Rock, to my family, to my life. But here's the thing that haunts me. Here's what I can't explain and can't forget. When I got home 3 days later, my wife Sarah was furious. Not because I'd been gone 3 days, because I'd been gone 3 weeks. My phone calls, my check-ins, my excuses, none of them had happened, according to her. According to everyone, I'd vanished the night I took that load to Mobile. My truck had been found abandoned on Highway 15 at mile marker 77, empty and locked. They'd been searching for me, had filed a missing person report, had feared the worst. But I'd only been gone 3 days. I had receipts, timestamps, proof. Except I didn't. Because when I checked my phone, my GPS, everything showed 3 weeks had passed. The calendar on my wall showed a date I couldn't accept. I lost 3 weeks somewhere between mile marker 77 and mile marker 92. 3 weeks that I experienced as 3 days. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if I really escaped or if I'm still there somehow, living out a dream of freedom while my body sits at Harlan's service station, frozen in time, slowly becoming part of the place. I don't drive long haul anymore. Can't do it. The thought of being on those dark highways, of seeing those mile markers count up and down, of maybe finding myself back at mile 77, it's too much. I work local routes now, home every night, never more than 50 miles from my house. But sometimes I dream about it. About Harlan's smile and the woman who couldn't tell what time it was and that glass bottle of Coke that tasted exactly like childhood. And in those dreams, I'm back in my truck, watching the mile markers, and I see that yellow glow ahead. Mile marker 77. Harlan service station, forever open, forever waiting. And in the dreams, I always stop. Could you finish your shift knowing you weren't alone? My name is Keanu, and I used to work security at St. Catherine's Hospital in Johnson City, Tennessee. Used to. That's important, because what happened during my last shift there ended my career in security and left me with questions I'll never be able to answer. I'm a rational person, or at least I was. I believed in what I could see, what I could touch, what made logical sense. St. Catherine's took that certainty away from me, and I've never gotten it back. The hospital had been condemned for over a year when they hired me for the demolition security detail. My job was simple. Make sure nobody broke in to steal copper wire or copper piping before the wrecking crews arrived in the morning. It was supposed to be my last shift before the building came down, and they were paying triple overtime because nobody else wanted to work it. The regular security team had quit 3 weeks earlier, all at once, without explanation. I should have asked why, but I needed the money. My daughter Natalia had medical bills piling up, and triple overtime for one night of sitting in an empty building seemed like easy money. St. Catherine's had been built in 1952 and had served Johnson City for nearly 60 years before budget cuts and a newer facility made it obsolete. It was a sprawling 5-story building, all concrete and institutional tile, with that particular smell old hospitals have. Disinfectant and sickness and sadness all mixed together. Even empty, even stripped of most equipment, that smell lingered. I arrived at 8 p.m. with my flashlight, radio, and thermos of coffee. The demolition foreman, a gruff man named Dustin, met me at the entrance to hand over the keys. He looked tired, older than his years, and he didn't quite meet my eyes when he spoke. "Stay on the first floor," he said. "Don't go upstairs, especially don't go to the 4th floor." "Why?" I asked. "What's on the 4th floor?" "Pediatrics," he said. "The children's ward. It's been sealed since 2018. Structural issues. Just stay away from it." "If it's sealed, how would I get up there?" I asked. Dustin finally looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. Fear, maybe, or warning. "The seals have been broken before," he said. "People get in. People get curious. Don't be one of them. Just do your rounds on the 1st floor, keep an eye on the entrances, and leave when the crew arrives at 6 a.m. That's it." He left quickly after that, almost running to his truck, and I was alone in the cavernous lobby of a dead hospital. I set up my station at the security desk near the main entrance, tested my radio, no response, which wasn't surprising given we were the only ones in the building, and settled in for what I thought would be a boring night of reading and coffee. The first few hours were fine. I did a walkthrough of the 1st floor, checking doors, making sure the windows were secure. The building was mostly gutted. Patient rooms stood empty, their doors removed. The cafeteria was a hollow shell. The chapel was stripped of its pews and altar. Everything valuable or useful had been removed, leaving only the skeleton of what had been a place of healing. Around midnight, I heard it for the first time. Laughter. Children's laughter, high and bright, echoing from somewhere above me. I stood in the lobby, staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was just sound carrying from outside, maybe kids playing in a nearby neighborhood. But it was midnight, and the nearest houses were half a mile away, and the laughter was coming from inside the building. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the stairwell. The door to the stairs was supposed to be locked, but it swung open at my touch. The lock had been broken, recently by the look of it, metal still bright where it had been forced. I shone my light up the stairwell and saw nothing but darkness and the ascending steps. "Hello," I called out. "This is security. If someone's in here, you need to leave now." The laughter stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space it had occupied, and that silence was worse somehow, heavier, expectant. I should have gone back to my desk and called the police. But I thought about those triple overtime wages, about Natalia's medical bills, about how embarrassed I'd be if I called the cops over children's laughter in an empty building. I started climbing. The 2nd floor was administrative offices, all stripped and empty. The 3rd floor was surgical suites and recovery rooms, doors hanging open, metal glinting in my flashlight beam. The 4th floor was pediatrics, and the stairwell door was marked with a faded sign. Children's ward, authorized personnel only. This door was supposed to be sealed. Dustin had been very specific about that. But like the stairwell entrance, the seal had been broken, and the door stood slightly ajar. Warm air drifted through the gap, which didn't make sense because the building's heating had been shut off months ago. And with that warm air came a smell. Not the hospital smell I'd become accustomed to. This was different. Baby powder and crayons, and that particular scent of child sweat, sweet and innocent. I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the children's ward. My flashlight beam swept across a hallway that looked completely different from the gutted floors below. This floor wasn't empty. The walls still had their colorful paint, faded but intact, decorated with cartoon characters and clouds and sunshine. The tile floor was clean, recently mopped by the look of it. And the rooms, I could see into the nearest one, were furnished. There were hospital beds sized for children, and beside them stood IV poles with stuffed animals hanging from the hooks. There were toys scattered on the floor. There were drawings taped to the walls. This was impossible. This floor should have been stripped like all the others. But it looked like it was still in use, like patients might be sleeping in those beds right now, like nurses might appear at any moment to check vitals and adjust dosages. "Hello?" I called again, my voice barely above a whisper now. "Is anyone here?" Down the hallway, a door slowly swung open. Room 412. And from inside that room, I heard humming. A child's voice, humming a lullaby I recognized but couldn't name. I walked toward the sound, my flashlight beam shaking because my hands were shaking, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. Room 412 was a corner room, larger than the others, with windows that looked out over the city. In the center of the room was a hospital bed, and in that bed, illuminated by my flashlight, was a child. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair spread across the pillow. She was wearing a hospital gown, and she was humming, and her eyes were closed. "Hey," I said softly. "Sweetie, what are you doing here? Where are your parents?" Her eyes opened. They reflected my flashlight beam, glowing in the darkness. "Playing," she said. Her voice was strange, distant, like it was coming from very far away. "We're all playing." "All?" I said. "Who's all?" She sat up in bed, and her movements were wrong, too fluid, like she was underwater. She pointed to the doorway, and I turned to look. The hallway was full of children now, dozens of them, standing silently, all wearing hospital gowns, all staring at me with those reflective eyes. Some were on crutches, some had bandages. One little boy, he couldn't have been more than 4, was clutching a teddy bear and dragging an IV pole that was no longer connected to anything. "We're playing," the girl repeated. "We're always playing. Don't you want to play with us?" I backed toward the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs. "No," I said. "No, I have to go. I have to finish my shift." "But you just got here," another child said, a boy standing near the front of the group. His name tag said Truitt. Mr. Hassan left too quickly. Mr. Chris wouldn't play either. Mr. Sam ran away. But you seem nice. You seem like you'd stay. Hassan, Chris, Sam. Those were the names of the security guards who'd quit 3 weeks ago. I'd seen their names on the old schedule. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, reaching for the door handle. "You all need to leave too. This building is being demolished in the morning." "We know," the girl in the bed said, and she was standing now, though I hadn't seen her get up. She was beside me suddenly, her small hand reaching for mine. Her skin was cold, so cold it burned. "We've always known. They've tried to demolish this place before. 3 times now. But the ward never comes down. We're still here. We're always here." I yanked my hand away and ran. I crashed through that group of children, and they felt like cobwebs, like smoke, There and not there, solid and insubstantial. I reached the stairwell door and threw myself through it, taking the stairs 3 at a time, falling twice and barely catching myself. Behind me, I could hear them. Not running, not chasing, just following at that same steady pace. Their footsteps synchronized, and underneath it all, that laughter again, echoing in the stairwell. I hit the first floor and sprinted for the main entrance, fumbling with the keys, and I heard a voice behind me, small and plaintive. "Don't go. We get so lonely. We just want someone to play with." I looked back. They were coming down the main staircase now. Dozens of children in hospital gowns, all walking in perfect unison, descending step by step. And behind them, the 4th floor was visible through the stairwell window, and it was glowing. Not with electric light, but with something else, something warm and wrong. I got the door open and ran outside into the parking lot, to my car, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. I drove away, and I didn't look back until I was 10 miles down the highway. When I finally did glance in my rearview mirror, I could see St. Catherine's in the distance, and the 4th floor was dark again, just broken windows and empty space. I called the demolition company from a gas station, told them I'd had a medical emergency, couldn't finish the shift, they'd have to find someone else. They were angry, threatened to withhold pay. But I didn't care. I was never going back to that building. The demolition was scheduled for 6 a.m. I watched the news that morning, waiting to see if they'd actually do it. The report came on around 8 a.m. The demolition had been delayed, the anchor said. Structural complications. The 4th floor of St. Catherine's Hospital had refused to come down. 3 attempts with the wrecking ball, and the floor remained standing while the rest of the building crumbled around it. Engineers were baffled. They'd never seen anything like it. The news footage showed the ruins of St. Catherine's, 4 floors reduced to rubble. But there, impossibly, stood the 4th floor. The children's ward, intact and whole, perched on top of nothing, like a ghost floor haunting the space where a hospital used to be. They brought in different demolition crews over the next month. They tried explosives, controlled burns, everything. Nothing worked. The 4th floor wouldn't come down. Eventually, they gave up and built a fence around it, marked it as structurally unstable, and left it standing. It's still there now, if you drive through Johnson City. Just the 4th floor of St. Catherine's Hospital, standing alone in an empty lot, windows dark, rooms waiting. But sometimes at night, people report seeing lights on that floor. Warm, soft lights, like night lights in a children's room. And if you get close enough, if you're quiet enough, you can hear them playing. Children laughing and running and living out something that isn't quite life in a place that isn't quite there. I don't work security anymore. I stock shelves at a grocery store now. Regular hours, always around people, never alone in dark buildings. The pay is worse, but I sleep better. Most nights. Because sometimes I dream about room 412, about that little girl with her cold hand and her reflective eyes. And in my dreams, she asks me the same question. Don't you want to play with us? And the terrible thing is, part of me does. Part of me wants to go back, to understand what they are, what they want, why they're trapped in that ward. Part of me wants to help them somehow, to free them or join them or just give them the companionship they're begging for. But I never will, because I know deep in my bones that if I go back, if I enter that ward again, I won't leave. I'll become one of them, Another figure in a hospital gown, wandering those colorful hallways, playing endless games in rooms that shouldn't exist. Waiting for the next security guard, the next curious person, the next fool who thinks they can handle one night in a condemned hospital. The children's ward is still there, still waiting, still playing. And it will be there long after I'm gone. Long after everyone who remembers St. Catherine's is dead. Because some places don't follow the rules. Some places refuse to end. And some children never stop playing, even when the game is over. Even when there's nothing left to play with but the darkness and the dust and the hope that someone, someday, will finally join them. What grows in the dark when no one's watching? My name is Marvin, and I'm a property inspector in rural North Carolina. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady. And after 27 years in the business, I thought I'd seen every kind of property neglect imaginable. Houses consumed by mold, buildings with foundations crumbling into sinkholes, structures so infested with termites they were barely standing. But nothing in my experience prepared me for the house on Wendell Road, the one the locals just called the Kudzu House. The assignment came through on a Tuesday morning in July. A bank in Charlotte needed an assessment on a foreclosed property before they could proceed with sale. The address was 4147 Wendell Road, about 40 miles outside Asheville, deep in the mountains where properties could sit abandoned for years before anyone noticed or cared. The file noted that the previous owner, a man named Donald, had died 6 months earlier with no heirs, and the property had defaulted to the bank. Standard stuff. I loaded my equipment into my truck and headed out, expecting another routine day of measuring foundation cracks and testing for water damage. Wendell Road was barely a road at all by the time I found the turnoff. More like 2 tire ruts cutting through dense forest. Kudzu covered everything out here. That invasive vine that grows a foot a day in summer, smothering trees and abandoned cars and anything else that stays still long enough. The south is full of kudzu, but this area seemed especially infested. Green tendrils creating walls on both sides of the road, blocking out the sunlight even at noon. The house appeared suddenly, and I had to brake hard to avoid passing it. I say appeared because that's exactly what it did, emerged from a mass of kudzu so thick and complete that the structure was barely visible. The vines had consumed the entire building, covering it from foundation to roof peak, turning it into a lumpy green mound that barely resembled a house at all. Only a few details gave it away. The sharp angle of a roofline here, the rectangular suggestion of a window there, all buried under layers and layers of vegetation. I sat in my truck for a moment, trying to figure out how I was supposed to inspect a house I couldn't even see. The kudzu was so dense I couldn't find the front door. I grabbed my machete, yes, property inspectors in the South carry machetes, and started cutting my way through the vines toward where I estimated the entrance should be. The kudzu was wrong from the first cut. Instead of the clean slice I expected, my blade seemed to drag, like cutting through something tougher than plant matter. And when I pulled the severed vines away, they felt warm. Not sun-warmed, because this deep in the growth there was no sunlight. They felt warm from the inside, like they had their own heat source. I told myself it was decomposition, organic matter generating warmth as it broke down. But it didn't feel like decay. It felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. It took me 20 minutes to cut through to what I thought was the front door. The kudzu had grown so thick over the entrance that I had to carve out a tunnel, vines forming a ceiling and walls around me, their leaves blocking out all natural light. I used my flashlight to navigate, and that's when I noticed the first strange thing. The kudzu vines weren't just covering the house randomly. They were arranged in patterns, deliberate patterns. The leaves formed shapes that almost looked like letters, and the vines twisted in ways that seemed intentional, purposeful. I finally broke through to the door, which was unlocked and opened with a push. The interior was dark and humid, the air thick enough to choke on. My flashlight beam revealed a living room completely overtaken by kudzu. The vines had grown through the windows, under the doors, up through the floorboards. They covered the furniture, climbed the walls, spread across the ceiling in a canopy of green. But unlike the exterior growth, which was chaotic and wild, the interior kudzu was organized. The vines formed clear pathways through the rooms, like hallways or trails, and they'd left certain areas untouched. A chair here, a table there. Specific objects that the plant had grown around rather than over. I started taking photographs and measurements, documenting everything for my report. The house was a total loss, obviously. No amount of remediation could save a structure this compromised. My job was just to confirm that and provide documentation for the bank's paperwork. But as I worked my way through the rooms, I began to notice more oddities. The kudzu had arranged itself into shapes on the walls. Not random shapes, words. I found the first one in the kitchen, vines and leaves forming clear letters. Listen. In the dining room, stay. In the hallway, help. Each word was perfectly formed, deliberately created, and the vines that made up the letters were darker than the others, almost black, like they'd been there longer or had absorbed something from the walls. My hands were shaking as I photographed the words. This wasn't possible. Kudzu was just a plant, invasive and fast-growing, but still just a plant. It didn't form words, didn't communicate. But there was no denying what I was seeing. Someone or something had arranged these vines, or the vines had arranged themselves, and either option was deeply wrong. I was about to leave, to get out of that house and call my supervisor with some excuse about why I couldn't complete the inspection, when I heard it. A rustling sound coming from upstairs, like something moving through the kudzu. I froze, listening. The sound came again, a slow dragging noise, accompanied by the whisper of leaves brushing against each other. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely steady. "If someone's up there, you're trespassing on bank property. You need to leave." The rustling stopped. Silence filled the house, broken only by my own breathing and the hammer of my heart. Then, from upstairs, a voice. Not a human voice. Something that approximated human speech, but wasn't quite right. Like words spoken through a mouthful of leaves and dirt. "Ma Arvin," it said, stretching my name out impossibly long. "He helped me." I ran for the front door, but the kudzu had grown back over the entrance in the 20 minutes I'd been inside. The tunnel I'd cut was gone, filled in with fresh vines, and when I tried to push through them, they resisted. They didn't just block me, they pushed back, actively preventing me from leaving. I hacked at them with my machete, cutting frantically, but for every vine I severed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The kudzu was moving now. I could see it clearly in my flashlight beam, tendrils extending and retracting like fingers, weaving together to form barriers. And all around me, words were appearing on the walls, formed from leaves and vines, forming sentences now. "Don't leave. Stay with us. Help us grow. Become part." I switched tactics, running for the back of the house, looking for another exit. I crashed through a door into what must have been a bedroom, and there I found him. Donald, the previous owner, or what was left of him. He was sitting in a chair by the window, and the kudzu had consumed him. Vines grew through his body, entering through his mouth and nose and eyes, emerging from his chest and arms and legs. They'd wrapped around him so completely that he was more plant than person now, a framework of human bones and dried flesh supporting a growth of green leaves and dark vines. But his hand was moving, one skeletal finger twitching, and from somewhere inside that mass of vegetation, I heard breathing. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, Donald was still alive, kept functioning by the kudzu that had invaded his body, his consciousness trapped inside a prison of vines that had been growing for months or years. The kudzu around him formed words, vines spelling out a message across the wall. It listens, it learns, it keeps. I understood then. The kudzu wasn't just a plant. It was something else, something that had learned to mimic, to communicate, to preserve. It had kept Donald alive, sustaining him, using him, and now it wanted me too. It wanted to add me to its collection, to incorporate me into its growth. I smashed through the window, not caring about the broken glass tearing my clothes and skin. I fell into the kudzu outside, into a mass of vines that immediately began wrapping around my ankles, my legs, pulling me down into the green. I cut and slashed and screamed, fighting my way through vegetation that seemed to have a will of its own, that actively tried to hold me, to drag me back toward the house. I don't know how long I fought. Minutes or hours, time lost meaning in that green hell. But eventually, I broke free, crashing out onto clear ground, 50 feet from the house, bloody and gasping, shaking so badly I couldn't stand. I crawled to my truck, got the engine started, and drove away as fast as the terrible road would allow, watching in my mirror as the Kudzu House shrank behind me, a green mound that pulsed slightly, like breathing. I called my supervisor from the main highway and quit, told him I was done, effective immediately, health reasons. He tried to argue, but I hung up on him. Then I called the county sheriff and told them there was a body at 4487 Wendell Road, that they needed to investigate immediately. They sent deputies out that afternoon. I know because they called me later with questions. They said they'd found the house exactly as I'd described, completely consumed by kudzu. But when they cut their way inside, they found no body. No Donald sitting in a chair with vines growing through him. No words on the walls, just an empty house full of normal kudzu growth, the way any abandoned structure in North Carolina might look after being left alone for a few years. They asked if I was sure about what I had seen, if maybe the heat had gotten to me, or if I'd been mistaken. I told them I knew what I saw, but they didn't believe me. They wrote it up as a false report and closed the case. But I know the truth. I know Donald is still in there, or what's left of him, hidden somehow by the kudzu when the deputies came looking. I know that plant is more than a plant, that it has some kind of intelligence or purpose. And I know it's still growing, still spreading, still waiting for the next person to wander into its green embrace. I moved to Arizona 3 months later. Desert climate, nothing green, nothing that grows wild. I work construction now, nothing that requires me to enter abandoned buildings or deal with neglected properties. I sleep with the lights on, and I never, ever touch plants. Not even the small succulents my wife Ailani tries to keep in the kitchen. Because I can't forget the feeling of those vines wrapping around my legs, the warmth of them, the purposeful way they moved. And I can't forget Donald's twitching finger, the proof that the kudzu keeps what it catches, sustaining them somehow in an existence that isn't life, but isn't death either. The bank eventually sold the Kudzu House. I looked up the records online, morbid curiosity I couldn't resist. Some investment company bought it sight unseen, planning to clear the lot and build new. But according to county records, no construction ever started. And when I pulled up satellite images from last month, the green mound is bigger now, spreading beyond the original property lines, consuming the surrounding forest. It's still growing, still waiting. And somewhere inside that mass of vines and leaves, I think Donald is still there, kept alive by a plant that learned how to preserve what it captures. A plant that whispers with a voice made of rustling leaves, calling out to anyone who comes close enough to hear. I wonder how many others are in there now. How many people have investigated that property since I left? How many the Kudzu has claimed? And I wonder what it's learning from them, what knowledge it's absorbing, what it's becoming as it spreads and grows and consumes everything in its path. They say Kudzu can grow a foot a day in the right conditions. But the Kudzu House grows faster than that, much faster. And it's not just growing outward anymore. It's growing smarter, more deliberate, more hungry. If you're ever in the mountains of North Carolina and you see a house consumed by Kudzu, don't investigate. Don't get close. Don't try to help. Just drive past and forget you saw it. Because some growth can't be stopped, some vines can't be cut, and some houses don't want to be empty. They want to be full. Would you answer a call from voices that shouldn't exist? My name is Abdil, and I'm a pastor, or at least I was. What happened at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Beaufort, South Carolina, destroyed my faith in ways I'm still trying to understand. I've served congregations for 15 years, counseled hundreds of people through their spiritual crises, presided over countless services. I thought I understood the line between the sacred and the profane, between the divine and the damned. The Emmanuel Church taught me that some lines are thinner than we think, and some calls come from places we shouldn't answer. I was assigned to Emmanuel in late March, sent by the diocese to replace Pastor Kareem, who'd resigned suddenly after only 3 months. The church board was apologetic about the rapid turnover, but assured me the congregation was welcoming and the historic building was beautiful. What they didn't tell me, what I only learned later, was that Emmanuel had gone through 6 pastors in 2 years. Each one had left abruptly, citing personal reasons or health issues, and each one had refused to discuss their time at the church. Emmanuel was indeed beautiful. Built in 1887, it was a classic example of African-American church architecture, with white clapboard siding, tall windows of colored glass, and a bell tower that dominated the Beaufort skyline. The sanctuary could seat 200 people, though the current congregation numbered only about 40, mostly elderly members who'd been attending since childhood. They welcomed me warmly that first Sunday, their faces full of hope that maybe this time the new pastor would stay. The first few weeks were normal. I held services, visited the sick, organized a community meal program. The congregation was kind and engaged, and I started to feel at home. But I noticed things, small things that didn't quite add up. The way conversations would stop when I entered certain rooms, the nervous glances members exchanged when I mentioned wanting to start an evening Bible study. The fact that nobody, absolutely nobody, stayed in the church after sunset. I asked about it finally, approaching Miss Caroline, the church treasurer who'd been a member for 57 years. "Why does everyone leave so quickly after evening events?" I said. "Is there a safety concern in the neighborhood?" Her face went pale. "Pastor Abdil," she said quietly, "there's something you should know about the church, about what happens at night." She told me the story in her kitchen over sweet tea, her hands shaking as she spoke. In 1963, during the height of the civil rights movement, Emmanuel had a choir of 12 members who practiced every Saturday evening, preparing music for Sunday services. They were led by a woman named Melody, who had a voice people said could make angels weep. On October 12, 1963, a fire broke out during choir practice. Faulty wiring in the organ, the investigation concluded. The fire spread quickly, and the church doors, which had been chained shut from the outside by Klan members, couldn't be opened. All 12 choir members died, trapped in the sanctuary while they sang hymns and prayed for rescue that came too late. The church was rebuilt, Caroline said, but it was never the same, because the choir never left. Every Sunday night at 3 a.m., you can hear them singing. Beautiful songs, hymns we all know, but performed by voices that have been dead for 60 years. People have tried to record it, to document it, but nothing ever captures the sound. It's only there if you're in the church, listening. I didn't believe her. I'm ashamed to admit it now. But I thought it was a local legend. The kind of ghost story every old church accumulates. I thanked her politely and changed the subject. But that night, lying in the parsonage next door to the church, I couldn't sleep. And at 3 a.m. exactly, I heard it. Singing. A full choir, harmonizing beautifully, their voices rising and falling through a hymn I recognized. His eye is on the sparrow. The sound was coming from the church, clear and unmistakable, filtering through my bedroom window. I got up, went to the window, and looked at the sanctuary. It was dark, no lights visible, but the singing continued, powerful and pure. I told myself it was a recording, someone playing a prank. I marched over to the church in my pajamas and robe, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. The singing stopped in the moment I crossed the threshold. Silence crashed down like a weight, and I stood in the dark sanctuary alone, feeling foolish. I checked the building thoroughly, searching for speakers or recording equipment, but found nothing. I went back to bed, wrote it off as my imagination or sound carrying from somewhere else. But the next Sunday night at 3 a.m., I heard it again, and the Sunday after that. Every Sunday, like clockwork, the choir sang for exactly 1 hour, from 3 to 4 in the morning. And every time I entered the church, they stopped. After the 4th week, I decided to stay in the church during the singing. I wanted to experience it fully, to understand what was happening. So that Sunday night, I let myself into the sanctuary around 2:30 a.m., settled into a pew, and waited. At 3 a.m. precisely, they began. But this time, being inside the church when it started, the experience was completely different. The voices didn't come from any particular direction. They surrounded me, filling the space with sound so beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. I could hear individual voices, distinct and clear. A soprano with crystal clarity, a bass that resonated in my chest, a tenor that soared above the others. 12 voices, perfectly blended, singing with passion and skill that no amateur choir should possess. I sat there transfixed, listening to hymn after hymn. Amazing Grace. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Wade in the Water. Songs of hope and freedom and longing, performed with an emotion that felt almost desperate. And then, in the middle of Go Tell It on the Mountain, something changed. The singing got louder, much louder, and underneath the beauty, I heard something else. Pain. These voices weren't just singing. They were crying out, each note carrying an anguish that no music should contain. I realized with horror that I was listening to people who died in terror and agony, whose last moments had been filled with smoke and heat and the betrayal of knowing they'd been murdered for the color of their skin. I stood up wanting to leave, but my body wouldn't move. The singing was holding me in place somehow, the sound wrapping around me like chains. And then I heard a new voice, speaking between the musical phrases. "Pastor," it said, and the voice was female, rich and warm, despite the pain underneath. "Pastor, we need your help." "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. "Melody," the voice said. "I led this choir in life. I lead it still in death. We've been singing for 60 years, Pastor. Every Sunday, 3 a.m., we sing the songs we died singing. We can't stop. We're trapped here, in this moment, reliving our death over and over." The choir continued behind her voice, never stopping, maintaining their perfect harmonies even as their director spoke to me. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you trapped?" "Because we died without absolution," Melody said. "We died in fear and hatred, murdered by men who called themselves Christians. We died without a pastor to speak peace over us, without last rites, without anyone to pray for our souls. We've waited 60 years for a pastor strong enough to hear us, brave enough to stay and listen. Will you help us?" I wanted to say yes immediately. These were souls in torment, people who'd been murdered for trying to worship, and I was a pastor. Helping suffering souls was my calling. But something made me hesitate. Something about the desperation in Melody's voice, about the way the singing had intensified, about the pressure I felt building in the sanctuary. "What do you need me to do?" I asked carefully. "Sing with us," Melody said. "Join our choir, add your voice to ours. If we have 13 voices instead of 12, we can finally end the song. We can finally rest." The choir's volume increased, becoming almost painful, and I understood. They didn't want absolution. They wanted completion. They wanted to add me to their number, to trap me in their eternal performance. 12 had died in the fire, and 12 voices sang every Sunday, and they wanted a 13th to break whatever curse or pattern held them. "No," I said, and I ran for the door. The singing pursued me, growing louder and more discordant, the beautiful harmonies breaking down into screaming. I crashed through the sanctuary doors and kept running, across the churchyard, into the parsonage, slamming and locking the door behind me. Inside my house, I could still hear them, muffled but insistent, singing and screaming and calling my name. The singing didn't stop at 4 a.m. that night. It continued until dawn, and when the sun finally rose, it cut off mid-note, leaving a silence that rang in my ears. I called the diocese the next morning and resigned. I didn't explain, couldn't explain, just said I was having a crisis of faith and needed to step away from ministry. They tried to convince me to stay, offered counseling and sabbatical, but I refused. I packed my belongings and left Beaufort that afternoon, and I've never been back. But here's what haunts me. Here's what I can't reconcile with my faith or my understanding of the divine. I did research after I left, digging into the history of the Emmanuel Church fire. I found newspaper articles, investigation reports, survivor testimonies from people who lived nearby. And according to every source, 12 people died in that fire. 12 choir members burned to death on October 12, 1963. But when I was in that sanctuary, when I listened carefully to the voices, I counted them. I separated each distinct voice, cataloged each individual singer, and there weren't 12 voices in that choir. There were 13. Someone had already joined them. Some previous pastor or visitor or foolish investigator had said yes when Melody asked, had added their voice to the eternal performance. And now they wanted 14. And they would keep asking, keep calling out to every new pastor, every person brave or stupid enough to stay in the church at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning until they had enough voices to... What? Complete some hellish choir of the damned? sing loud enough to be heard in whatever afterlife they'd been denied. I don't know. I don't want to know. I'm not a pastor anymore. I work at a bookstore in Atlanta now, far from Beaufort, far from Emmanuel Church. But every Sunday morning at 3 a.m., I wake up. I can't help it. My body remembers, even though my mind wants to forget. And in the silence of my apartment, I sometimes hear it, faint and distant, like sound traveling across miles and years. I hear that choir singing. 13 voices now instead of 12, harmonizing in perfect, tortured beauty. And I hear Melody's voice calling out, patient and persistent. Pastor Abdil, we're still waiting. We'll always be waiting. Won't you come back and join us? Won't you help us complete our song? I never will. I can't. But I pray for them, those 12 souls who died in fire and hatred, and the 13th who made the mistake of trying to save them. I pray that someday they find peace, that God grants them the rest they were denied in death. But I fear my prayers go unheard, because some calls don't come from heaven or hell. They come from the spaces in between, from moments of suffering so intense they burn through time itself, creating loops that play forever, trapping anyone foolish enough to listen. The Emmanuel Church still stands in Beaufort. They found a new pastor eventually, a young man named Corey, fresh out of seminary, eager and faithful. I saw his picture on their website last month. I wonder if he's heard the choir yet. I wonder if he stayed to listen. I wonder if when I wake up next Sunday at 3 a.m., I'll hear 14 voices instead of 13. God help us all. How desperate would you have to be to ignore every warning? My name is Azael, and I'm a long-distance delivery driver for a medical supply company based out of Memphis. I drive routes most truckers won't touch. The overnight hauls through Appalachia, the back road deliveries to rural clinics that can't afford premium shipping. The pay is decent because the work is brutal. And after 8 years on these routes, I thought I'd seen every roadside oddity the South had to offer. Decrepit motels with missing letters in their neon signs, gas stations that looked abandoned but somehow still pumped fuel, diners where the coffee tasted like it had been brewing since the Reagan administration. But I'd never seen the Pines Edge Motel until that night in September. And I wish to God I never had. I was driving through West Virginia on Route 52, somewhere between Bluefield and Welch, hauling insulin and antibiotics to a clinic that needed them by morning. It was past midnight, raining hard enough that my wipers could barely keep up, and I was fighting to stay awake. I'd been on the road for 14 hours. My last meal had been a gas station sandwich 8 hours earlier, and my eyes kept trying to close despite the energy drinks I'd been downing. That's when I saw the sign. Pines Edge Motel, vacancy, cable TV, clean rooms. The neon was bright red against the rain-dark sky, and below it I could see the motel itself, a long single-story building with a parking lot and a blinking office sign. I hadn't passed a motel in 2 hours, and I wasn't going to pass another for at least 30 miles. I knew I shouldn't be driving in my condition. I'd fall asleep at the wheel and end up as a statistic. So I pulled in, telling myself I'd sleep for 3 hours and still make my delivery on time. The parking lot was empty except for 2 old cars that looked like they'd been there for years, slowly rusting. I parked my van near the office and ran through the rain to the door. A bell chimed when I entered, and I found myself in a small lobby that smelled like old cigarettes and pine air freshener. The decor was decades out of date. Wood paneling on the walls, a console television in the corner, magazines on a table that were all from the 1980s. Behind the desk sat an older man in a cardigan sweater. his name tag reading Emmett. "Evening," he said. And his smile was friendly, but his eyes were strange. Too focused, like he was studying me. "Rough night to be on the road." "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for a few hours. Whatever you've got available." Emmett pulled out an actual physical ledger, the kind nobody uses anymore, and ran his finger down a list of names. "Let's see. Room 3 is occupied. Room 7 is being cleaned. But I've got room 612 available. Nice quiet room, just got renovated." "Room 6.5, I said. "That's an odd number." "Added it in a renovation," Emmett said, still smiling. "It's between the first and second floors. Stairs were giving guests trouble, so we put in a landing room. Very cozy, very private." I was too tired to question it. I paid cash. He didn't take cards, which should have been another warning. And he handed me an actual metal key attached to a large plastic diamond with 612 written on it in marker. "Checkout is at 11, Emmett said, though most folks in room 612 tend to stay longer than they plan. I didn't ask what he meant by that. I just wanted to sleep. I went back into the rain, grabbed my overnight bag from the van, and followed the room numbers along the exterior walkway. Room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Standard motel layout. But between rooms 6 and 7, there was a door I'd somehow missed on my first glance. It was recessed slightly, painted a different color than the others, and above it was a small brass plaque that read 612. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and I stepped inside. The room was wrong from the first moment. It wasn't between floors at all. It was on the same level as the other rooms. And it was bigger than it should have been, the interior dimensions not matching what the exterior suggested. The ceiling was lower too, creating a compressed feeling, and the single window looked out onto something that wasn't the parking lot. I could see trees through that window, dense forest, even though I knew the motel backed up to the highway. But I was exhausted, and the bed looked clean, and I told myself I was just disoriented from too many hours driving. I locked the door, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the bed without even undressing. Sleep came immediately, heavy and dreamless. I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Heavy footsteps, walking back and forth, never stopping. I checked my phone. It was 3:17 a.m., and I'd been asleep for about 2 hours. The footsteps continued, steady and rhythmic, and with them came a dragging sound, like something being pulled across the concrete. I got up and looked through the peephole in the door. The hallway outside was empty. No one walking, no one dragging anything. But I could still hear the footsteps, loud and clear, right outside my door. I unlocked it and pulled it open quickly, thinking I'd catch whoever was making the noise. The hallway was empty, but it was also wrong. When I'd walked to my room earlier, the hallway had been straight, just a long corridor with numbered doors. Now it curved, bending away to the left and right, and the doors were numbered differently. I could see room 6 to my left and room 7 to my right. But between them, where my door should connect to the main hallway, there was just wall. Room 612 existed in a space that shouldn't be there. I stepped back into my room and tried to calm down. I was overtired, disoriented, probably still half asleep. I'd wait until morning, check out, and forget this place existed. I locked the door again and returned to bed. But I couldn't sleep now. I lay there staring at the ceiling, and I started to notice details I'd missed before. The ceiling had water stains, but they were moving, spreading slowly across the plaster like living things. The wallpaper had a pattern that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. And the mirror above the dresser reflected my room. But the reflection was slightly off, furniture in different positions, my bag on the chair even though I'd left it on the floor. At 4 a.m., I heard voices. They came from the walls, muffled but distinct. A man and a woman arguing. A child crying. Someone laughing, high and manic. The sounds overlapped. Dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, all filtering through the walls from rooms that couldn't possibly be adjacent to mine. I turned on all the lights, grabbed my phone, and tried to call the front desk. No signal. I tried the room phone. It was disconnected, the cord hanging loose from the wall. I was trapped in room 612 with no way to communicate with the outside world. And the room itself was becoming more wrong with every passing minute. At 5 a.m., I saw the first person in the mirror. A man standing behind me, wearing clothes from the 1960s, his face gray and sunken. He was there in the reflection, but not in the actual room. When I spun around, there was nothing behind me. But in the mirror, he remained. And now he was joined by others. A woman in a nightgown, a teenager in a Letterman jacket, an old man in a bathrobe. All standing in my room, visible only in the reflection, all staring at me with empty eyes. I recognized the look on their faces. Desperation. The same desperation I'd felt driving through the rain, exhausted and looking for any place to rest. They'd all stopped at the Pines Edge Motel. They'd all checked into rooms. And somehow, they'd ended up here, in room 612. In the space between that existed outside normal geometry. The room numbers made sense now. Room 612 wasn't between floors. It was between everything. Between the motel and something else. Between the physical world and somewhere that followed different rules. It was a collection point, a trap. And I'd walked right into it because I was too tired to notice the warnings, too desperate for rest to question the obvious impossibilities. At 6 a.m., the door to my room opened, even though it was locked. I didn't open it. It just swung inward on its own. Beyond it wasn't the hallway. It was another room 612, identical to mine, but mirror reversed. And beyond that room's window, I could see another room and another, stretching away in an infinite series of identical spaces. I heard Emmett's voice calling from somewhere distant. Checkout is at 11, though most folks in room 612 tend to stay longer than they plan. I understood then. This room had infinite occupancy because it was infinite rooms, all stacked somehow in the same impossible space. Every person who'd ever checked into room 612 was still here, trapped in their own version of the room, all existing simultaneously in a location that shouldn't exist. I ran. I didn't go through the door. I went through the window, crashing through the glass into what I'd thought was forest, but was actually just more rooms. I fell through space that bent and twisted. Room 612 multiplying around me. And I saw them all. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all trapped in identical rooms, all banging on doors that wouldn't open, all screaming into phones with no signal. I kept falling. And then I was in my van. I don't remember getting there. Don't remember the transition. One moment I was falling through infinite rooms. The next, I was behind the wheel of my delivery van, parked in the Pines Edge Motel parking lot, and the sun was rising. My overnight bag was in the passenger seat. My boots were on my feet. My phone showed 6:47 a.m., and I had a voicemail from my dispatcher asking why I hadn't checked in. According to my phone, I'd been at the motel for 6 hours. But I had no memory of sleeping, no sense that any significant time had passed. Just the nightmare of room 612 and the faces in the mirror. I drove away without going back to the office, without trying to make sense of what had happened. I completed my delivery, made my excuses, and requested different routes. I haven't driven through that part of West Virginia since. But I still see the motel sometimes. When I'm driving at night, exhausted, looking for a place to rest, I'll see a neon sign. Pines Edge Motel, vacancy. Always vacancy. The building appears on different roads, in different states, always when I'm at my most desperate. And I know that if I ever stop again, if I ever check in for just a few hours of sleep, I'll end up in room 612. And next time, I might not fall back out. I wonder about the others sometimes. The man in 60s clothes, the woman in the nightgown. Hundreds of exhausted travelers who made the same mistake I almost made permanently. Are they still there, trapped in their infinite rooms? Can they see each other through their mirrors, a community of the desperate existing in fractured space? I drive longer shifts now. I push past exhaustion, dose myself with caffeine, do anything to avoid needing to stop at unfamiliar motels. Because I know the Pines Edge is still out there, still offering vacancy to anyone desperate enough to ignore the warnings. And room 612 is waiting, existing in the space between spaces, ready to add another guest to its impossible occupancy. Some rooms you check into, some rooms check you. And some rooms exist in places that don't quite exist at all, waiting with infinite patience for the next traveler who's too tired to notice that the room number makes no sense, that the dimensions are wrong, that you can never really leave a place that exists everywhere and nowhere all at once. What if the dead were trying to tell you something? My name is Wesley, and I'm a genealogy researcher specializing in African American family histories in the Deep South. It's meaningful work, helping people trace lineages that were deliberately obscured by slavery and Jim Crow, connecting families separated by centuries of systematic oppression. I've spent countless hours in courthouses and archives, but most of my real discoveries happen in cemeteries. That's where the stories are written in stone, where the dead speak if you know how to listen. I thought I understood cemetery research. I thought I knew how to read graves and respect the dead. Then I went to Mercy Hill Cemetery outside Mobile, Alabama, and learned that sometimes the dead don't just speak. Sometimes they warn. The assignment came from a client named Georgia, a woman in her 70s trying to trace her maternal line back to a plantation that had operated near Mobile before the Civil War. She'd hit a wall in the paper records, and I suggested we try the cemetery route. Mercy Hill was the oldest African-American cemetery in the county, established in 1842, and it contained graves from enslaved people, freedmen, and their descendants. If Georgia's ancestors were from the area, they'd likely be buried there. I arrived at Mercy Hill on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The cemetery sat on 5 acres of rolling land, bordered by live oaks, dripping with Spanish moss. It was beautiful in that melancholy southern way, peaceful and sad all at once. Many of the graves were old, the stones weathered to illegibility, and the cemetery had clearly struggled with maintenance over the years. Weeds grew high between plots, and some sections were so overgrown they were barely accessible. I'd brought my camera, notebook, and GPS unit. My process was systematic. Photograph every grave marker, record the GPS coordinates, transcribe any legible text, and compile everything into a database I could cross-reference with historical records. It was tedious work, but I found it meditative, a way of honoring people whose lives had been reduced to footnotes in other people's stories. I started in the oldest section, where the graves dated back to the 1840s and 1850s. Many stones here were simple field stones or wooden markers that had rotted away entirely, leaving only depressions in the earth to indicate burial sites. But there were a few elaborate markers too, probably placed by descendants years later to honor ancestors who'd been buried with no marker at all. That's where I found the angel. It stood in the far corner of the oldest section, a concrete statue about 4 feet tall depicting an angel with wings spread and one hand outstretched. The detail was remarkable for concrete work. You could see individual feathers in the wings, the folds of the angel's robe, the serene expression on its face. At the base of the statue was a brass plaque, weathered but still legible. In memory of those who, else, died warning others. The inscription struck me as odd. Not a name, not a date, just that cryptic phrase. I photographed the statue from several angles, noting how it seemed to be positioned not over a specific grave, but at a junction where several old paths intersected. The angel's outstretched hand pointed toward the newer section of the cemetery, toward graves from the 1900s onward. I took 6 photographs of that angel, methodically documenting it from every angle. Then I moved on, working my way through the older section, photographing and cataloging for the next 3 hours. The sun was getting low when I decided to take a break. I sat on a bench near the cemetery entrance and started reviewing my photos on my camera's display screen. That's when I noticed something impossible. In the first photo of the angel, it was positioned exactly as I'd seen it, facing forward, hand outstretched toward the newer section. But in the second photo, taken from a different angle maybe 30 seconds later, the angel had moved. Not much, just slightly, but enough that its outstretched hand was now pointing in a different direction. In the third photo, it had moved again. And in the 4th, 5th, and 6th photos, the angel was in progressively different positions, its hand pointing to different areas of the cemetery. And in the final image, the statue was turned completely around, facing me, its hand reaching toward the camera. My blood went cold. I looked at the timestamps on the photos. They were sequential, 30 seconds to a minute apart. There was no way someone had physically moved a 4-foot concrete statue between shots without me noticing. And yet the photographic evidence was undeniable. The angel had changed positions. I walked back to the statue, my heart pounding. It stood exactly as I'd originally found it, facing forward, hand outstretched toward the newer section. I checked the base for any kind of rotating mechanism or pivot point. Nothing. The statue sat on a solid concrete foundation, old and weathered and definitely not designed to move. I took another photograph, then immediately took a second one. When I reviewed them, the angel was in a different position in each image. In the real world, standing in front of it, the statue never moved. But in photographs, it was active, repositioning itself with each shot, its pointing hand indicating different areas of the cemetery. I'm a rational person, a researcher, trained to find logical explanations. But I couldn't explain this. Camera malfunction? Except the malfunction was consistent and purposeful, the statue moving deliberately rather than randomly glitching. Optical illusion? Except the changes were measurable, documented, real in the photographic record, even if not in physical observation. I studied the photos again, trying to understand what the angel was pointing at. In different images, its hand indicated different graves in the newer section. I marked the locations on my cemetery map and walked over to investigate. The graves the angel pointed to all had something in common. They were death dates from different years spanning from 1921 to 2003. but each marker included some variation of the same phrase. Died warning others, gave life to save, sacrificed self for community. Death came through service. These were people who died trying to help others. A man named Junior who died pulling children from a house fire in 1921. A woman named Taylor who died warning her neighborhood about a flood in 1947. A teenager named Riggs who'd been killed by Klan members in 1965 while protecting younger siblings. On and on, a pattern of sacrifice and warning. I went back to the angel statue and looked at the brass plaque again, in memory of those who died warning others. This wasn't marking a single grave. It was marking all of them, a monument to every person in this cemetery who'd given their life trying to protect someone else. But why did the statue move in photographs? What was it trying to tell me? I took another photo, and this time the angel was pointing directly down at the ground beneath its own base. I knelt and looked more carefully at the area around the foundation. There, half buried in dirt and weeds, I found another brass plaque, older and more weathered than the one on the statue's base. I cleared away the debris and read the inscription. Here lie 12 souls, names unknown, who died in the fire of 1842 while warning others of danger. Their sacrifice is not forgotten. This angel marks their grave and points toward all others who followed their example. May their warnings continue to save lives. 1842, the same year the cemetery was established. I looked up the history on my phone and found a brief mention in a local history website. In August 1842, a fire had started in the slave quarters of a nearby plantation, probably from a lantern. 12 enslaved people had died, but not from the fire itself. They died running through the quarters, waking others, warning them to flee, staying behind to make sure everyone else got out. By the time they tried to escape, the fire had spread too far. They'd saved over 100 people through their sacrifice. They were buried here, in this corner of Mercy Hill, beneath the angel that marked their communal grave. And somehow, through some mechanism I couldn't understand, that angel continued their mission. It pointed toward others who died in service, creating a map of sacrifice throughout the cemetery. It moved in photographs because photographs are how we preserve and warn. They're messages sent across time, ways of saying this happened and don't forget. But there was something else. I took one more photo of the angel, and this time it was pointing neither at old graves nor at graves in the newer section. It was pointing behind me, toward the cemetery entrance, toward the parking area. I turned and looked. A man was walking toward the cemetery, moving with purpose toward the older section where I'd been working. He was carrying something, and even from a distance, I could see it was a gasoline can. As he got closer, I could see his face, twisted with rage, and I heard him muttering about disrespecting the dead and outsiders who don't belong. The angel had warned me. It had shown me its purpose through those impossible photographs, and now it was doing what it had always done, warning someone of danger. I didn't confront the man. I called 911, kept my distance, and watched from behind a mausoleum as he poured gasoline on graves in the oldest section. The police arrived before he could light it, and they arrested him. A man named Zaire, with a history of mental illness and a fixation on protecting the cemetery from what he saw as intrusion. The officer who took my statement said I was lucky I'd called when I did. Another few minutes and Zaire would have started a fire that could have spread through the entire cemetery, destroying irreplaceable historical markers and possibly killing anyone in the area. I thought about those 12 souls from 1842, burned to death while saving others. I thought about the angel that marked their grave, about how it had pointed me toward the graves of other people who died warning and protecting. And I thought about how, in the end, it had warned me too, adding me to the chain of people it had helped save across nearly 2 centuries. Before I left Mercy Hill that evening, I stood in front of the angel one more time. I took a final photograph, expecting to see it pointing somewhere new. But in that last image, the angel was positioned exactly as it appeared in reality, facing forward, hand outstretched, frozen in its eternal gesture of warning. I sent my client Georgia the cemetery data she needed. I compiled my research, wrote my report, and completed the assignment. But I went back to Mercy Hill 3 more times over the following weeks, always bringing flowers to place at the base of the angel, a small tribute to the 12, whose names were never recorded, but whose purpose persisted. On my final visit, I brought a brass polish and cleaned both plaques until they gleamed. As I worked, an elderly woman approached me. She introduced herself as Raylyn, the volunteer caretaker of Mercy Hill. She'd been maintaining the cemetery for 40 years. "You know about the angel," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know it moves," I said. "In photographs." Raylyn nodded. "It's been doing that for as long as anyone can remember. My grandmother told me about it. The angel points to those who died saving others. And sometimes, when there's danger in the cemetery, it warns the living too. It's saved people from snakes, from unstable ground, from falling tree branches. And twice before, it warned about people who came to do harm." "3 times now," I said, and I told her about Zaire. She smiled sadly. "Those 12 souls, they couldn't save themselves. But they saved everyone else. And they're still saving people, still warning, still protecting. That's what this cemetery is, Mr. Wesley. It's full of people who gave everything so others could live. The angel is just the most visible reminder." I finished my work in Alabama and returned home to North Carolina. But I think about Mercy Hill constantly, about the angel that moves in photographs, about the 12 souls whose sacrifice echoes across centuries, about the chain of warnings that connects the dead to the living, that makes sacrifice immortal. I'm more careful in cemeteries now. I pay attention to monuments, to their positioning, to what they might be trying to say beyond their inscriptions. And I take more photographs because sometimes cameras see what eyes can't. And sometimes warnings come from the most unexpected sources. The dead aren't always quiet. Sometimes they speak, sometimes they warn. And sometimes, if we're paying attention, they save us just like they saved others all those years ago. All we have to do is listen. Could you survive when the building itself wants you to stay? My name is Leonard, and I'm a veteran. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan, came back with PTSD and a disability check that barely covered rent. I'm not proud of what I became after the service. Homeless, drifting from town to town, sleeping rough, drinking too much. But I'm telling you this so you understand my mindset the night I found the smokehouse. I was desperate, cold, and looking for any shelter that would keep me out of the November rain. I thought I was just finding a place to sleep. I didn't know I was walking into something that had been waiting, that had been counting, that had been hungry for exactly the right number. This happened outside Harrodsburg, Kentucky, in the rural stretch where old tobacco farms have been abandoned for decades. I'd been walking along a county road for hours, soaked through, shivering, when I saw the structure through the trees. It was an old meat processing facility, the kind they used to build in the 20s and 30s, before industrial meatpacking centralized everything. The main building was collapsed, But the smokehouse stood intact. A windowless brick structure about 30 feet square with a metal door hanging half open. I didn't think twice. Shelter was shelter, and brick walls meant protection from the wind. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, pulling it shut behind me to trap what little warmth my body could generate. The interior was a single large room with a high ceiling. Rusted hooks hung from a track system that ran along the ceiling, dozens of them, swaying slightly in the draft from cracks in the walls. The floor was concrete, stained dark with decades of blood and grease. There was no furniture, no debris, nothing but those hooks and the overwhelming smell of old smoke and meat that had soaked into the brick over decades of use. I found a corner that seemed structurally sound, spread out my sleeping bag, and tried to get warm. My hands were shaking from cold and alcohol withdrawal, and I was exhausted enough that I fell asleep within minutes despite the discomfort. I woke to the sound of machinery, a rhythmic grinding, mechanical and loud, echoing off the brick walls. My eyes snapped open, and I saw the hook system moving. The track was operating, carrying hooks in a slow circuit around the ceiling, and I could hear gears turning somewhere above me in mechanisms that should have been dead and rusted for decades. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. The smokehouse had no power. I'd checked when I entered. Old habit from the military, always secure your position. The electrical lines had been cut years ago. But the hooks were moving, gliding along their track with smooth precision. And as they passed overhead, I saw they weren't empty. Meat hung from them. Not fresh meat, but not completely rotted either. Sides of beef, pork shoulders, whole chickens, all in various states of preservation, and they looked wrong. The color was off. The texture strange, like they'd been hanging there for decades, but somehow hadn't decomposed fully. They just kept circulating, around and around the room, driven by machinery that shouldn't work. I grabbed my gear and ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but something held it shut from the outside, or maybe from the inside. I couldn't tell which. I threw my weight against it, kicked it, slammed my shoulder into the metal until my arm went numb, but it wouldn't budge. The grinding of the machinery changed pitch, got louder, and I heard something else underneath it. Counting. A voice, genderless and hollow, counting slowly in rhythm with the moving hooks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I spun around, searching for the source, but the voice came from everywhere. From the walls themselves, from the bricks that had absorbed decades of death. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The hooks continued their circuit, and I noticed something new. Between the hanging meat, there were spaces, empty hooks, evenly distributed throughout the track system, and they were passing by me one by one as the voice counted. 11, 12, 13. 14. I pressed myself against the wall, watching those empty hooks pass, and I understood with a clarity that cut through my panic. The smokehouse was counting them, counting the empty spaces, counting toward something. I'm a veteran. I've been in firefights. I've been in situations where staying calm meant staying alive. I forced myself to think tactically. The door was blocked, but maybe I could breach the wall. The bricks were old, the mortar might be weak. I pulled my knife from my pack, a KA bar I'd carried since my service days, and started chipping at the mortar between bricks. The counting continued, steady and patient. 15, 16, 17. The mortar was harder than I'd hoped, reinforced with something. But I kept working. Chips of brick and dust fell away, and I could feel cold air on the other side. I was making progress. 20, 21, 22. I glanced up at the hooks and realized I was running out of time. There were maybe 30 empty hooks in the system, and the voice had already counted 22. When it reached the last one, something would happen. Something final. I worked faster, ignoring the pain in my hands as the knife handle dug into my palms. The bricks were coming loose, one shifting enough that I could work my fingers behind it and pull. It came free with a grinding sound, and cold night air rushed through the gap. 23, 24, 25. I pulled another brick and another, creating a hole large enough to squeeze through. Behind me, the machinery sound changed again, becoming more urgent, and the hooks started moving faster. The voice counted faster too, almost frantic now. 26, 27, 28. I threw myself at the hole, forcing my body through the gap, sharp edges of brick scraping my sides and back. I felt my jacket tear, felt skin split, but I kept pushing, desperation giving me strength I didn't know I had. 29. I was halfway through when something grabbed my leg. Not a hand, something metal and cold looped around my ankle. One of the hooks had dropped from the track, extending on a cable I hadn't seen, and it had caught me. It pulled, trying to drag me back into the smokehouse, and the voice reached its final count. 30. The machinery stopped. Complete silence fell, and in that silence, I heard something worse than the counting. Satisfaction. The building itself seemed to exhale, like it had completed something important, like it had reached a goal it had been working toward for a long time. The hook's grip loosened slightly, and I used that moment to kick free, ripping my pant leg but getting my ankle loose. I tumbled through the hole and onto the muddy ground outside, rolling away from the smokehouse, putting distance between me and that door. I looked back at the building. The door was open now, hanging on its hinges exactly as I'd found it. Through the opening, I could see the interior, the hooks still, the machinery quiet. Everything looked normal, abandoned, harmless. Except for one thing, there were no empty hooks anymore. Every single hook in that track system held something now. Meat, yes, but also other things. Shapes that might have been human once, preserved by smoke and time and whatever dark mechanism ran that place. And hanging from the 30th hook, the last one in the sequence, was my sleeping bag. Torn open, positioned on the hook like it was being prepared for processing. Like the building had intended to add me to its collection, but had settled for a substitute when I escaped. I ran. Didn't stop running until I reached the highway 3 miles away, where a trucker named Ahmed picked me up and drove me to Lexington. I reported the location to police, told them there were human remains in an abandoned smokehouse. But when they investigated, they found nothing. Just an empty brick building with a rusted hook system, no power, no bodies, no evidence that anything I described had actually happened. But I had the scars on my ankle where the hook grabbed me. I had the torn clothes and the scratches from the bricks. And when I finally got access to a computer at a shelter, I researched the facility. Found newspaper articles from 1956 reporting on the death of a worker at the Harrodsburg Meat Company smokehouse. A man named Nathaniel had been killed when the hook system malfunctioned, catching him and carrying him through the smoking process. The machinery had been shut down after his death, the facility abandoned. But the articles mentioned something strange. They'd found 29 other hooks occupied with meat in various states of processing. But there should have been 30. One hook was always left empty, supposedly for the foreman to inspect. Nathaniel had been the 30th. And the smokehouse had been waiting, counting, trying to complete its quota ever since. How many people had it caught over the decades? How many homeless veterans and drifters and people nobody would miss had been added to those hooks? Preserved forever in a building that refused to stop working even when its power was cut and its purpose obsolete? I don't sleep in abandoned buildings anymore. I found services, got help, been sober for 8 months now. I work part-time at a hardware store, rent a small apartment, and I'm putting my life back together. But I think about that smokehouse every day, about the counting, about how close I came to being number 30 in whatever dark cycle that building was running. And I wonder how many other places are out there, still running their processes, still trying to complete quotas that nobody set and nobody remembers. Buildings that don't understand they're supposed to be dead, that keep doing what they were designed to do long past any reasonable purpose. Counting, collecting, completing. If you're ever desperate enough to shelter in an abandoned building, listen first. Listen for machinery that shouldn't work, for voices that shouldn't speak, for counts that shouldn't matter. Because some buildings don't just house the dead. Some buildings create them, one at a time, patient and persistent, until they reach whatever number satisfies whatever hunger drives them. I survived the smokehouse. But I know others didn't. I know that somewhere in rural Kentucky, there's a brick building with 30 hooks, all full now, all waiting for the cycle to reset. And when it does, it will start counting again. 1, 2, 3, building toward 30, adding to its collection one desperate person at a time. Don't be the one who completes the count. That's my story. That's what happened to me in Harrodsburg. I've shared 11 stories with you tonight. 11 moments when the ordinary South revealed something extraordinary and terrifying underneath. These are the stories that live in forgotten corners, in places where the past refuses to stay buried, in buildings and roads and spaces that follow rules we don't understand. If you have your own Southern horror story, if you've experienced something that defied explanation in the back roads and small towns of the Deep South, share it in the comments below. This is Verified Fears, and we're a community, a family of people who know that the scariest stories are the ones that might be true. Subscribe to the channel if you want more true horror stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, the South keeps its secrets close. But if you listen carefully, if you pay attention to the warnings, you might just survive your encounter with whatever waits in the darkness. Stay safe out there. And if you ever find yourself on a dark road, in an empty building, in a place that feels wrong, trust your instincts. Run. Because some places don't want visitors. They want residents. And once they have you, they never let go. This is Verified Fears. Thanks for watching, and sweet dreams, if you can.